Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. I am George the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike the Buzzsawsty.
Sports Talk, back with you here in the new year. A busy one so far. January, as it is wont to do, continues to drag on without end. Still does not end. Soon, hopefully soon.
Happy New Year is over, though. There's no need to say Happy New
Year's
Year.
over.
It is the end of the month. There is no longer a need to say Happy New Year.
I heard somebody do that.
It's one weekend is all I give it to you. I believe January 7th or 8th, and that's the end of Happy New Year. It's a Larry David special.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. It might have been like at a basketball game that I was covering and heard somebody, people that hadn't seen each other yet, I guess, in that year. But also at that point, it's like, you might as well wish them a happy Valentine's Day.
Even if you haven't seen each other, yeah, it's done. After a certain point, it's just done, regardless of whether you've seen each other or not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You're into, as we're recording here on the 24th of January, you cannot say Happy New Year now, almost a full month in, but we are now into 2024.
January continues to drag on. The weather continues to drag on. We continue to drag on here at the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. A reminder that you can find all of our goings on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, TuneIn, wherever you get your podcasts. That's where we're at. Search Howitzer, Howitzer Buzzsaw to find us on those platforms. And also a shout out to the Hyphen Podcast Group, of which we are a part, a Morgantown, West Virginia-based podcast collective. Podcast for the people, y'all. hyphenpodcastgroup.com and on socials. And our thanks to Kellen B. Conley, whose music you hear here on the HBS.
We continue into this new year being a champion that we are, thanks to Kellen B. Conley, often brought into his championship level tunes. And of course, you can find us on social media, on X, Twitter, anything you may venture over towards, at Mike Osti 11 for myself, at Gerbo 3, and of course at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show handle. And like every other year, that continues into this year. If you can't find us, you are just not trying hard enough, because we are still here, even into a new year.
We out here grinding, baby. I tell you what.
Yeah.
Some other people.
You haven't got rid of us. Some people maybe are leaving places and going to new places, but you haven't got rid of us. We're still.
I'm a little beat. I'm a little beat from Christmas and the holiday season, I have to admit, this year. Also beat from vacation. Good beat. Skiing nice. Vacation. Yeah, it was very nice. But it's time for February. Is one of my favorite months for obvious reasons, and so excited for that to turn the corner once we get there. Some people that are not wasting any time in this month of January, Mike, are coaches. The carousel is up. It is spinning. It's playing its music. The horses are going up and down. If you're one of those people that likes to just sit in the little lounger thing, this ain't your ride. The ride's got horses.
No vacations for them.
No vacations for them. Because one move, seemingly more so nowadays than it did, when we were growing up, one move sets in motion dominoes that ripple across the entire industry in terms of then assistants and other people who move left and right. Obviously, Nick Saban left Alabama, decided to finally retire in a bit of a shock move to some, who many thought he still had a few years left in him, and others, it hasn't completely ruled out shutting the door on that, in explicit terms, but his move sets off. Kalen DeBoer moves there from Washington, and now you've got, of the 4 teams that were in the college football playoff just 2 weeks ago, the only one left with their head coach still in place is Steve Sarkisian, of all people, at Texas.
Right. Yeah.
And the most recent of those departures happened with Jim Harbaugh, who we kind of suspected this after his flirtations in the past. If you recall, 2 years ago, him and the Minnesota Vikings had conversations for their job, went to Kevin O'Connell. Him and the Denver Broncos had conversations last year. That job went to Sean Payton after they fired Nathaniel Hackett. And now it appears that Jim Harbaugh will return to the NFL after a decade plus at Michigan. going back to the state of California, and specifically a team that he played for, Mike, in his career in the Los Angeles Chargers. Of course, they were in San Diego when he played there. But he will leave Michigan after winning the last 3 straight Big Ten titles, winning a national championship in this season, a national championship that for many is shrouded in controversy, between Harbaugh being suspended for the first 3 games of the season due to a recruiting violation, and then Harbaugh being suspended for the final 3 games of the regular season due to the sign stealing scandal that is yet to really conclude in many ways.
Yeah. Still counts as of now.
Counts as of now. But we'll talk first in specifics about this move vis-a-vis the NFL, where Harbaugh comes back. He could have been, I don't want to say be at Michigan for life, because, it's not, you have to look too far ago.
Well, there were reports that before he decided on his NFL destination, because the last few years he's flirted with NFL teams, but has not even officially received an offer. They did go in other directions. So he had in his back pocket an extension to be the highest paid coach in all college football. Yep. And talking about the scandals, he was even trying to work in language that regardless of what comes out in the future, whether it's cooked up or whether it's legit and we don't know it yet, he wanted language to be in there, though, that would say, hey, yeah, maybe we're vacating wins. Yeah, we're going to face this punishment. The NCAA now knows more. The NCAA, the Big Ten, they may want to do more. They've already punished us once, but they may want to do more if they learn more, but I can't be fired. Yeah. He wanted to basically be sitting there, potentially being suspended. Maybe he would go through another season half suspended, but he couldn't be fired, because generally speaking, part of the reason why you'd want that in there, every single time throughout, especially college sports history, usually if a scandal goes so far, and of course they try to protect the guy if they're winning, like Michigan did with Harbaugh, but if it goes so far, usually the first thing that a program will do, whether it's basketball, football, or whatever, will say, okay, NCAA, Big Ten, whatever, you caught us, we'll fire the coach. They just part ways with the coach, and then there's a period of atonement, and usually they can't be welcomed back there for a period of time. That's usually how it goes. And Harbaugh wanted language in there to basically say, you can't do that to me. If I come back and I don't go to the NFL, you cannot part ways with me and say that's a way to give into the NCAA and get off my back. We're going to fire Harbaugh. No, I would be forced to stay. You'd be stuck with me. So it would have been unprecedented, incredible language him and his agent were trying to work in there. Some argue just for leverage with the NFL. Some argued to protect himself because nothing was guaranteed, because as we're going to get into later, unlike the last few coaching cycles when he was flirting with the NFL and he didn't get those jobs, there are some big fish also available. It's not, the Chargers fit him, but it's not exactly like it was just Harbaugh, and if we fire a coach, we go look at Harbaugh, he's the best available, despite the national title. Bill Belichick, who right now is still looking for a job, is dangling out there. Mike Vrabel, fired by Tennessee, successful tenure there, looking for a job. So there are quality coaches that maybe need a job, that it wasn't a slam dunk for Harbaugh to get one. So he put a lot of that in his back pocket, that if this didn't work out with now jumping back to the NFL, I'll go back to college and basically be bulletproof where I can't even be fired. And now, before he gets to the Chargers and I fully unpack that, we also do have to add that, like what happened at Alabama with Nick Saban, and they're still going to be fine and win games, but this now will open up a window for Michigan. So 30-day window opened up. A lot of 5-star recruits at Alabama decided to decommit, to transfer out. They lost some players. They're no longer the preseason national title favorite like they are every other year now, because they have to retool the roster. Same thing happened in Washington. Same thing happened in Arizona when they had to move on and bring somebody else in after coaches jump. And it did cause a domino effect after Saban decided to retire or leave Alabama. Now the same thing. And there are reports that Michigan's going to promote within, but until that is officialized, this will have a window. So they could lose players as well, despite just winning a national championship. So that's part of this too, that did not exist even 4 years ago when Harbaugh first started flirting with the NFL during the Michigan tenure. Like that wouldn't have existed in terms of a portal opening. That's what we learned recently in terms of West Virginia really killed them after the Huggins drama. The portal opened and that changed the roster. If the portal wouldn't have opened, a lot of those players in past years would have been stuck there. So that was part of what created the problems at WVU after the Huggins drama. That's going to occur now at Michigan. But Harbaugh's not going to care about that because what Jim Harbaugh did, which George, this is also why I always thought he would jump this year. There were a couple caveats when we discussed this before during the season that if occurred, I thought he would jump to the NFL. Number one, if the NCAA / the Big Ten became so much of a pain in the you-know-where that he just didn't want to deal with it any longer. Like Pete Carroll a decade plus before him, after his success at USC, Pete Carroll basically, after a while, he vocally said he wanted to stay there forever and be maybe one of the greatest college coaches of all time. He won a national title, got another claim to another one off an AP vote, and then basically said, okay, NCAA, you won't get off my back, so I'm going to the NFL. I'm going to try the NFL again. He got a big job with the Seahawks, won a Super Bowl there, even though at the time no one thought that was a great job, but he just wanted out of Dodge, out of USC, and kind of left them screwed for many, many years, but he ran out of town to avoid further sanction from the NCAA. So I thought that if the NCAA and Big Ten would not get off his back, Harbaugh would be looking for the next opportunity to get out of town. And yes, he faced suspensions, and yes, the Big Ten got involved, and maybe double jeopardy is there. Maybe they're not going to find anything else out new. If we just know what we know now, maybe that'll be it. But it's pretty clear, George, and I think Harbaugh knows this. Despite Michigan being the top brand, they make the most money, they have the largest fan base, and now they won a national title, 3 straight Big Ten titles. You could argue it doesn't make sense for the conference to cannibalize itself like this, but the Big Ten is fully interested in screwing over Michigan because every other program in the Big Ten is in their feelings trying to take advantage of Michigan having their sanction issues. Michigan still won a national title, but it doesn't mean they're going to be done. It doesn't mean that there won't be something else out, that some other program is going to try to dig up some new dirt, and if they find it out, they're going to go after Harbaugh again. So Harbaugh doesn't want to deal with that. The NCAA also can always come back and say, we now know this, we're going to do this. He didn't want any of that anymore. So I thought that if he couldn't get rid of them for good, and you never can get rid of them for good, then maybe he also would jump if a good job was out there. The other end of it, George, that we talked about before, and it has now happened, that did not occur during his whole Michigan tenure up until now, is he achieved his goal. When he left the NFL to go to Michigan, he said, and even in his opening press conference a decade ago, I want to win a national championship for Michigan. I'm a Michigan man. My father was a Michigan man. The family's Michigan men. Michigan is the winningest program in college football history. They do have now 12 national titles, but as was talked about after they won the 2023 national championship just a few weeks ago, as we started this new year, they have the 97 championship, but that was a split year with Nebraska also owning a share of it. Prior to that was 1948, the last consensus, undisputed. We cannot debate it. And yeah, maybe there's drama and sanctions, but no one else has a claim national title. Only 2 of them since the 50s have been a Michigan championship. 97 and now, and 97 again is shared with Nebraska. So Michigan only has 2 national titles in the last 70 plus years, nothing since 97 in the first consensus since 1948. Harbaugh got there and wanted to bring that back to Michigan. He did. He won them a national championship, and now the next challenge is there. Now he wants to become one of those coaches to win a national championship at the highest level of college football, and then also a Super Bowl title. He wants to join Pete Carroll, who I mentioned earlier, the Jimmy Johnsons, the Barry Switzers, the coaches who have done that. It is a small elite group. He does it regardless of how many years he coaches in the NFL, even if he doesn't accumulate 200 wins. He'll get into that Hall of Fame. He's going to probably be in a college football Hall of Fame with what he's done so far, despite the scandals. So he'll move to a different level. And, George, if I'm him, I don't mind that they didn't get the Vikings job because Kirk Cousins got hurt. They lost players. Who knows the future of that franchise? I don't mind the Bears went in another direction. That franchise is in flux still again. They're not sure what they're going to do at QB. They did win at the end of the season, but they're just perpetually in flux. I'm not too upset I didn't go to the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton's dealing with that instead of me because we saw the end of Russell Wilson. He got better, but they didn't like him. It didn't work, and that now is a mess as well with tons of drama. I think the Chargers is a great situation, and out of all the jobs open, I even wrote about this, and I stand by it now that it's the case. This was the one job that made sense for Jim Harbaugh. I don't think the Falcons would have made sense unless they're going to trade for an all-pro QB. Certainly Carolina wouldn't have made sense. That's years to try to rebuild something. They don't have that QB there. I don't think Tennessee would have made sense. If Chicago, say, was open, I don't think that would have worked, as I already talked about the Bears issues. Even honestly, if the Dallas Cowboys job would have been open and they would have decided to fire Mike McCarthy, I still think the Chargers job is the best for Harbaugh. He's a quarterback. He's a former QB. When he's won, from Andrew Luck at Stanford to Colin Kaepernick with the 49ers when they went to the Super Bowl and the championship games, to J.D. McCarthy at Michigan winning a national title and getting in the playoff, to now with Justin Herbert, who is a stat machine and a young, sexy, elite quarterback that everyone loves. Now he'll finally get a coach that is a offensive mind like him that can work with him. They can be together. They can work out plays. They can make sense and be in perfect harmony. I don't think he would have found that anywhere else. And if he didn't get that opportunity, I think he would have went back to Michigan. But now that he has the Chargers job, it works for him. It works for Herbert. It works for the Chargers. He's proven he can win in the NFL, granted a decade ago. Obviously wins at the highest level of college. It makes sense. It's the next challenge. He's already maxed out now in college despite trying to do it more. So I think this totally makes sense for Harbaugh, and I do also think it totally makes sense for the Chargers. Nothing's guaranteed, but this is an offensive coach that played QB before, that won in the NFL before, and is now won in college, that can help Herbert get to the next level, can elevate a lot of players on that team that is still very, very talented. And yes, the defense has been their issues, and he's not a defensive coach, but he can hire a great defensive coordinator to try to fill out the staff who's a veteran too. And I just think this works and makes sense. And I would predict this is going to lead to success. But of course, the bar, I would imagine now for both Herbert and Harbaugh, is to eventually get to a Super Bowl and then for Harbaugh to win it because he's already been there and lost.
Sharon Moore expected to be the leading candidate, Michigan assistant who filled in for Harbaugh in the games that he did not coach in due to suspension.
You remember him of crying after games and thanking Harbaugh.
Yeah.
On cue. Immediately circuit or what happened there.
But Jesse Minter may go with him to help on the offensive side of things, which would be interesting to see him in the NFL. And as you said, Harbaugh, we have the demonstrated success of what he did in San Francisco.
It was a long time ago. There are some that claim his Michigan scheme doesn't work in the NFL any longer.
I would even, that's fair. I would argue that he was able to do it with a franchise and with a franchise that had issues at that time. We think of the 49ers now and how great they are. You could very easily argue that the Harbaugh years and the Kaepernick years for as rife with different, warring factions in there on and off the field.
Yeah, that Super Bowl appearance against the Ravens
Harbaugh set the table for them to do what they're doing now under John Lynch. But back then, the general management and stuff didn't really jive as well. And I think that was one of the reasons Harbaugh.
It's a different management group. I think the best way to explain it, because it's different people. So some would argue that no, it's a different regime. He changed the culture back to a winning culture.
Yes.
Is what he did.
Yes.
Because after Steve Young retired, even the Jeff Garcia was there, T.O. was there. But basically, George, I'll give you an exact timeline. Once Terrell Owens created drama and they had to move on from him, they then went on a decade of sucking. Yeah. It wasn't directly tied to T.O., obviously. He's a receiver, quarterback, other positions are even more important to winning. But after the T.O. drama, up until Harbaugh and Kaepernick, they were no longer a contender, and they were a contender with T.O. So if you want to give that as a benchmark, basically early 2000s from 2000 to 2010, they kind of were an afterthought despite being an historic franchise. Harbaugh got there, championship game, Super Bowl appearance almost overnight. He really quickly changed that culture, and at the time came from college when no one believed he could do it. Kaepernick, who we now all know from his political career and what he's trying to do for the culture and how he left the league. But prior to Harbaugh, he was not thought to be what he became even for that short amount of time. So that's why when if people can get their brains backwards, that's why when Harbaugh went to Michigan, George, after getting in the Super Bowl, and it's only a year or so later, he had a parting of ways with the 49ers over a contract. It wasn't really a firing, but it was a dispute. They kind of wanted to move on. He kind of then wanted to move on. It was very shocking for him to go to college. Even though he wanted to win national title as a Michigan man, usually once you achieve that level of success in the NFL, it's very rare to see a coach go backwards and then forward again. So he kind of did take a step back, even though he obviously got paid a lot of money and was at Michigan. And then also, to be fair to this, it took him many years to win at Michigan too. They were bad for several years. He had to build that back up after they were a down program for a long time too. So to what you're saying, I think it's a perfect fit, but this could take some time. There is reason to believe that maybe some think he's no longer an NFL fit because of so many years in college, and his system is now kind of mundane to what is done in the NFL currently, say what Justin Herbert wants to do, even if he's not been able to do it under Staley and company. So it's not a guarantee. I think it's going to fit. Do you think it's going to fit as much as I think it's going to fit, or do you have concerns off of what I'm saying that his previous scheme is a decade old? Herbert is a very electric quarterback. He wants to run electric plays, but that's not what Harbaugh did at Michigan. It was a very boring running offense with a game manager in J.D. McCarthy, who is not thought of right now as a top draft pick, despite what happened in college, even though he'll probably go somewhere. But that's not exactly what he's been doing for a long time. Yeah, the Herbert offense, what Herbert wants to do and what you can do with a fantasy gem of Justin Herbert, that's not what Michigan did. Maybe it's better in terms of being conducive for winning, but today's NFL, you got to score 35 points to win, basically.
Yeah, I think you've got the tools there in that San Diego team if they can keep some of the guys there. Austin Eckler's a free agent. Sorry, Los Angeles. Austin Eckler's a free agent there that's looking to see what his options are, and he's expressed he doesn't want to play, like a 15-year career in the NFL. So, and he's still an excellent running back who's in his prime. And you've got Justin Herbert, who we've seen able to do it. Again, this is a playoff team from a few years ago.
Yeah, so, he was hurt this past year. Otherwise, you would figure they would be the playoff team again.
So it's better than a Carolina situation where it's like, hey, these are your pieces, and you have to turn them into something. Like you've got the bones of a good house there
or even Atlanta. I mean, there was rumors they may trade for Cousins if they get Belichick.
Atlanta's another weird situation. Yeah, they've got some.
They'd have to bring in Cousins or somebody. That is a rumor, but they would have to bring in a veteran quarterback. Otherwise, right now, Desmond Ridder is not Justin Herbert.
Yeah, Atlanta's got San Diego is the most good bones on the house that you can renovate.
Los Angeles again. Sorry.
If you'd shut up for a minute and let me talk. The Chargers have the bones of a good house there.
They do,
with what you've got in the playmakers. Carolina, you got a lot of things to figure out, and you got an owner who's a hothead. Atlanta, same issue where they've, in theory, drafted good-looking players, but guys like Pitts and Bijan Robinson, in theory, should be good, and it just has not come together. They vastly underperformed this year. So, no, the Chargers seem like an excellent fit. He mentioned in his statement that, his relationship with the Spanos family, which if you are someone who lives in San Diego and is a fan of the franchise, probably don't like that much. But the Spanos family,
that is a true legit San Diego comment.
True legit San Diego. But he seems to be, this seems to jive well with what he's able to do. And if he can do it with a guy like Kaepernick, and I think the biggest thing, his
how about this? Do you think he would be there if Herbert wasn't there? Because I know we're talking about San Diego and the Chargers. And
I don't know.
I think it's about Herbert. I don't think he cares about the emotional connection to the Chargers as much.
Oh, sure. I mean, that maybe helps a little bit, but no, again, it's the best of the current, and I say current because you never know in this league, job opportunity situations. Atlanta is now, as we just kind of look at the rest of the field here, Mike, Atlanta has interviewed 14 different people for their head coaching job. And I'm not saying that according to Peter Schrager, and I'm not saying that as a, pejorative thing, but that's casting a very wide net. And that includes Bill Belichick twice, Mike Vrabel, who was just fired in Tennessee. Tennessee got their coach, former Cincinnati offensive coordinator. So
maybe it's a good thing, though. I mean, they haven't got it right in a while since getting in the Super Bowl. They might as well interview a lot of people.
Sure. Doing your complete due diligence. Carolina is still an opening. So
nobody wants to coach there, though.
And David Tepper has already, proven to be someone who's going to be difficult to work with if you're a coach or a general manager in that capacity. So no, the Los Angeles has the best opening. both in terms of stability and obviously the quarterback position. Bryce Young still may be a good quarterback. I don't think he's a Hall of Fame quarterback to begin with, but there still may be some talent you can get out of him there. I'm not saying his career is completely shot after one bad year on a bad team, but no, for a guy like Jim Harbaugh at his, not that he's old per se, but just, the tenure that he has in the coaching industry, you don't want to come into a complete rebuilding project. And of the places that was still, if I put it this way, if I was Harbaugh and I wanted to coach, if I wanted to coach in Atlanta, I wanted to be the Atlanta Falcons coach, would almost necessitate telling ownership, Arthur Blank, hey, we need to go out and get an established veteran starter.
Well,
Whether that's somebody else,
right? But that's why the rumors of Cousins even exist, because I don't think many of these veteran coaches would be interested in them if not for getting a veteran quarterback. That a lot of that could be connected, and maybe he doesn't think that's going to happen. Maybe he just loved Herbert. The Los Angeles market is a place that he wants to be back into because he was in California, as we talked about with Stanford, and having played in San Diego and that connection there. So California, whether it be San Diego or Los Angeles, and it is LA, is home for him in a way, like Michigan was, being a Michigan man. He likes that connection. And then Herbert being there. And George, I will go one step further to what you're discussing about the openings this year. As I said earlier, if we're going to talk about what Harbaugh could have had over the last 4 years, because he always was in these NFL rumors, if I go back and say 2024 Chargers or the 2022-23 Vikings, I'd rather have this job. If I compare the 2024 Chargers job to what the Bears would have been any of the last 3 years when they always were in rumors for Harbaugh, I would rather have this job. If I would go to Detroit before Campbell or any jobs that he was rumored into, and some of these are legitimate rumors, some of these are fans just talking. If I go to the Raiders job of a couple years ago because there were rumors of Harbaugh and the Raiders, I would still say this Chargers job as it stands now is the best job that he could have had any of the last 5+ years when he was flirting with teams, whether that was legit or not. And again, those years, he either was still building Michigan up, hadn't yet won a Big Ten title. Okay, he did that. He did it again. He did it again. He went to the playoff, did it again, but then they lost the playoff game. Now they won a playoff game, but now they won a national championship. He's completed the job at Michigan. Yeah, maybe they go back-to-back and do what Georgia did, but he got at least one. He's going to have a statue there. Lloyd Carr's the only other guy in the modern era to get one, and it was a share, as I said, with Nebraska. So Jim Harbaugh, you could argue, is right up there as greatest Michigan coaches of all time. And Bo Schembechler, George, all the wins he has, did not win a national championship. Jim Harbaugh got one, and no one can dispute it outside of the scandal and the sanctions, and we'll see how that materializes. But as we talked about on past shows, even if they come down and say you got to vacate this, we know he won the national championship. Everybody knows Michigan won the national championship. They didn't lose any games, and they won all their big games very convincingly. And the Penn State game, for example, they won with 30 straight run plays. It wasn't like the plays or the schemes or trying to steal signs even mattered there. So this is legit for me, legit for him, legit for Michigan. And now he moves on. And I do think, again, it is the right fit. Hypothetically for you, if say the Chargers job was not open because Herbert did not get hurt, like remember, as you said, they were a playoff team 2 years ago. If they would have returned to the playoffs this past season because Herbert was healthy again, and figuring if he was healthy, they may have got back and he did not get hurt, do you think Harbaugh stays in the NCAA and stays in college then and goes for it again with Michigan? Because as we're talking about, the Carolina job sucks. The Atlanta job needs a veteran quarterback. Tennessee's a murky job. Chicago did not fire a coach. McCarthy's still in Dallas. The Patriot obviously ascended Gerard Mayo, so that job wasn't really open. If the Chargers job was not open because they went back to the playoffs with Herbert healthy, I honestly think Harbaugh might be back in Michigan. There's not another. He's not going to go somewhere that is a losing job just to be in the NFL.
Do you think that the sign stealing scandal would have forced his hand regardless this year?
No, because here's the issue. As much as I did say that was part of what would want him to maybe
could
get
he have
out,
existed under that cloud starting over another season at Michigan?
I mean, again, maybe, maybe not. I did say that was one of the reasons why I think this was the perfect time for him to jump ship and why he really wanted to jump ship. He fortunately had the perfect storm of the Chargers job being open with a legit franchise QB that you don't have to trade for. He's already there. It's California. Yep. All the connection is there. This was perfect harmony. But George, That would be a lot to think about if I'm Harbaugh. Like, I already have a national championship and a statue, so I do have that kind of to be gravy on top of this. Even if we have a losing season, I can say I won a national title, regardless of scandal and recruiting and all of that. But what do you think is worse? Go back to Michigan, get suspended half a season again, deal with sanction, deal with NCAA lawyers, have it just be a pain in the ass, or go to Carolina and go 1-16. Like, sure. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't force jobs to be open if they're not open. Do you want to go to the NFL just to be in the NFL? Or do you want to be away from the scandal situation? Or do you want the perfect storm, which was the Chargers job, which is why he eventually jumped?
Yeah, he got the perfect storm. I'm of the opinion that he was going to leave regardless. After
so he would have just been at a bad job if the Chargers job was not
after this season, regardless of a Michigan national championship or not. I think this was his last season in Ann Arbor. So
what is unique, by the way, and I did talk to one on a show, and I don't know if this was just because they're probably secretly Michigan fans also, and they were rooting this to go the other way, but most of Michigan media, most of people that cover the Michigan program, nationally or locally, all were saying they did not think Harbaugh was actually going to jump to the NFL. I don't know why, because it felt like the tea leaves, certainly with the Chargers job, that it was the case that he was finally going to go.
And flirted with it for you don't flirt with it for 2 years without just being like, nah, I don't want to do it. You know,
I understand, but I mean, I understand, but I'm talking about reporters of the Detroit Free Press. I'm talking about people that work for Big Ten Network. I'm not talking about, somebody running the Michigan blog here. They all thought that there was 70-30, 50-50 that Harbaugh may stay, certainly because of the contract without any chance of really being fired despite randomly losing. And with their recruiting class coming in, they were going to win. So I don't know. At the end of the day, he does leave. It was the perfect job. But that's a question we're never going to know the answer to. I do wonder, George. I mean, I know you're saying he would have left anyway, or he would have been forced to leave. It would be hard to believe that he would be thrilled to death with going to the Carolina job or even the Atlanta job without Kirk Cousins coming.
Yeah.
Like, he might have had to do it, as you're saying, because he wants to get away from the sanctions. But I don't think that's a happy Harbaugh who's there forever. This Chargers situation, if they can do what they're supposed to do, he could be there for a while and they could finally win. And the franchise has never been in a Super Bowl. So that's the bar. And if he gets there, he's God there too, like Michigan. The question also is, how quickly do you think they become an elite program then will be the final Harbaugh question. And the reason why I asked that, as I said, despite Herbert's injuries, the Chargers' problem, even when he was healthy throwing points up, was defense. I mean, they had a year a few years ago where they led the league in offense and were last in defense, and that's why they weren't great. What does Harbaugh do to help the defense? And granted, he can bring in other coaches. Is this a 2 or 3 year journey? Can they be good right away? Do they need to retool the entire defense regardless of the stats Herbert puts up?
They do, and who he brings in on a coaching front is obviously going to play a big impact in that. To your point, that's, Brandon Staley, his, nadir was the beat down at the hands of the Las Vegas Raiders on Thursday night. In a game that you couldn't believe was actually happening before your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, that was the least sexy hire imaginable, and Harbaugh is at least kind of a flashy hire now.
Yeah, and Staley and his just like weird defiance about going forward in situations that didn't make sense. Just overly reliant on analytics or what have you from here and then. But no, you're right. It's defense is the biggest problem there. But it's. I mean, we are in an interesting era in the NFL where success is not that far off. Now, being elite is another story, but if you want to define success as, hey, we were bad.
I think next year you get him in the playoffs. I think that's a big.
Yeah. Like, hey, we were bad. We won 5 games. We won 6 games, and then the next year we're a 9-10 win team in the playoffs. It is not that hard to do in the last 5 years.
And sad to say, you can do it with an average defense. Not a bad defense, but if you can score 40, you can give up 30. It's crazy, but
you go the other way, you can do it with, an average offense. God bless Joe Flacco, but Cleveland had an average offense for most of the season.
Yeah, mostly a great defense. But
and mostly due to a decimation of injuries, and had a great defense. and look what they did. So
look at Green Bay this past year with Jordan Love. They beat Dallas, but Dallas still scored points. Right. I mean, again, Green Bay had one of their biggest wins in a while and a great win for Jordan Love.
Scheming and bad coverage.
They scored 40-plus points in a playoff game, but they also did give up 30-plus that no one talks about.
Yes.
Because the defense is still suspect. And you can say what you want about the San Francisco game, but that's an example of an average or even arguably worse defense. And if the quarterback can elevate himself, the offense can give you enough. They traded one of their better defensive players, Rasul Douglas, in the middle of the season, and they ended up having a playoff run because the offense was able to turn it on. So if Justin Herbert's here, and everyone thinks he's an elite quarterback or at least budding into one, if he's here and Harbaugh can take him to another level up higher and even elevate everybody else around him,
you can
and maybe the defense can just be what it is and they can overcome. Now, the other thing, salary cap wise, is not heaven there. So they might have to understand there's going to be a few years of work put in here. He did have that great run with San Francisco that was almost immediately, but the Stanford situation, the Michigan situation, now with the Chargers, usually Harbaugh will get the job done, but it usually does take a few years to build this program back up. And I would imagine they got to give him some time and know that. But, George, this is the Los Angeles market. They are the little brother to the Rams, who've already won a championship. They're now back in the playoffs. When they were supposed to be down for 3-4 years, they got back in with Matthew Stafford. So they're older, but they're still Los Angeles' number one team. In fact, a lot of Los Angeles people are more Raiders fans than even Chargers fans. Arguably, they're the third NFL team in the city. So they got a lot to fix there, but I do think this is finally the right hire.
Yeah, no, 100%. As for Atlanta, I mean, I don't know what direction Tennessee kind of does the quiet move, the coordinator move. Mike and weird, not weird, I should say, but I'll say rare because we were up to like 7 openings overall in the NFL. Seattle still has not figured out their situation, so that's one to put on.
They lose their offensive coordinator too.
We haven't mentioned them, and they lose their offensive coordinator. But rare that we saw 2 different openings, Mike, filled internally in terms of Gerard Mayo in New England, which you thought was kind of there. We found out after the point was their successive plan. So, it
was kind of under the radar a little bit.
Under the radar succession plans. Like, Gerard Mayo, we're grooming him to be the head coach. Like, nobody really, knew that public or widespread.
Right.
Robert Kraft did. And of course, in some aspects, Mayo did. So that's what they're going with in New England. I'd argue that coaching was less the problem there, and it's more their personnel that they've got.
Which was also Belichick, though, to be fair.
He was the general manager,
right.
yes. And so,
right, that was the problem.
That was a Belichick all-encompassing problem.
Yeah.
And then the Raiders, I'll give the Raiders credit because, Mark Davis, I could, even before we got to this point with the Harbaugh decision, could see him, Mark Davis making a big splash and being like, come to Las Vegas, and Jim Harbaugh, but the Raiders, they don't keep a few years ago when Rich Bisaccia did not such a good job, but did a good job and steadied the ship after another midseason coaching change with the Raiders, was their special teams coach. Midseason became the interim head coach. Didn't keep him on for the full job. He's actually Green Bay's special teams coordinator now. Antonio Pierce, former player.
A weird situation because he didn't have the credentials to do that in the middle of the season, but did have success.
Yeah, and like weird to not do it, but had success, rallied the guys around. He speaks in the Raider way of excellence, like Al Davis would have years ago.
I mean, he was there with Josh McDaniels, but
and gets the franchise, and and we'll see how that bears out over the course of a full season. So the Raiders go in-house there too. So we've got, Carolina and all their aforementioned issues, quote unquote. And that you want to talk about turnarounds, Mike, turnarounds in the other direction. That's a franchise that, was a playoff franchise within the last five plus years. With Cam Newton, and that division specifically has made it easy for teams to, be very accessible to the playoffs there. With Tampa winning it just, a game and a half, 9.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the allure of the Falcons or Carolina job, that you could literally win. I mean, 9 wins is probably enough to get in the playoffs, and it could happen.
It will not take much,
right?
Atlanta does really. Atlanta does really seem like the situation because, again, they got to figure out quarterback. It's not Desmond Ridder. It's not Marcus Mariota, who got snaps for them this year. You got to have somebody there to steady that position. And then at that point, and I'll mention too.
How do you work that trade without the coach hired, though? But how do you convince the coach without that trade worked?
Yeah.
How are you going to tomorrow trade for Kirk Cousins without a head coach? That seems weird. I mean, you could legally do it, but that's.
And so they've got we get Pitts and Robinson. You've got a lot of young stud offensive pieces that really haven't lived up to what I would say their potential is, just because of the middling nature of the team. And of course, let's throw in Washington, which is undergoing another entire culture shift. This time, a little more of a wholesale culture shift, considering the ownership has also changed since the beginning.
Yeah, this is the first one with the new ownership, so that's a major deal, right? Yeah,
I've been through many a culture change in Washington, and this is the latest one, but seems to be actually a little more honest.
Nobody believed anything Dan Snyder was hiring or saying.
Yeah,
so this is actually the full in earnest of a new era now,
and thorough. So so they've got to figure something out. And then, of course, and we've seen people change their coordinators. I'm not going to bet on it, but like there's still between now and like post Super Bowl, maybe a one-off something happens. We know that Mike McCarthy is staying another year in Dallas. We've had that confirmed. Any kind of rumors about Mike Tomlin and his situation in Pittsburgh, he's got a year left. That's been confirmed. It's Tomlin again.
Even with the Eagles and Sirianni,
The Eagles and Sirianni. Eagles come out, confirm that.
Yeah.
The Bears do seem like they're always one knee-jerk, itch away from, just canning the guy and going to the next
but they said they're keeping him, and because they won at the end of the year, everyone thought that job would be open. But the jobs you're mentioning, if I was a coach looking for a job, the Steelers, Eagles, and Cowboys, those would be solid jobs to walk in. Those are playoff teams. Those are historic franchises. Yeah, there's pressure in Dallas, and they haven't won big in a while, but still, there's a lot of talent there. You're going to get a lot of money. Those are good jobs, even if maybe the pressure makes one of them hard. Certainly the Cowboy one, and obviously, if Mike Tomlin would have stepped away, we all know the Rooney family would give you 20 years to figure it out. So they're not going to fire anybody new. So like those would be great jobs. Now the Eagles maybe are a little different. They do fire Doug Peterson a couple years ago. They get Sirianni go back to another Super Bowl after firing a coach who just won him one. So they're a little more knee jerk. But with those jobs not open, Atlanta, Carolina, and Washington, George, I'd almost, out of those, I almost would argue the Washington one might actually be the best one, just because
that was my next question to you, and throw in Seattle too, which is interesting. You've got
you could argue
Seattle,
that.
So of those seven, we've got four current open. We've seen what Geno Smith did 2 years ago in his comeback player of the year season. A little bit less prolific this past year, but you still got Kenneth Walker. It was her, Kenneth Walker the third, and Seattle was still a team that was playing in week 17.
They're one game out,
in week 18 for an outside shot at the wild card spot that Green Bay eventually got. So, but Kenneth Walker the third, excellent young running back, will be in his third season. Jackson Smith-Njigba was a rookie this year. He'll be in his second year next season. So, again, a talented offense, and we're not throwing defense, completely by the side, but you really need to get, if you can get the offense somewhat semblance right, you can kind of drag the defense along in this iteration that we're currently in the NFL. So of those four jobs, Seattle, Carolina, Washington, Atlanta, the best, we'll just say the best, not even most desirable, just what's the best job, all encompassing franchise, personnel, location, division, opponents, all that type of stuff. Which one you think is the best of those?
Yeah, I think the debate is between Seattle and Washington, but I will throw a caveat in. And I like Kirk Cousins more than some. Sometimes he's a national punchline. I know he's a lot of stats. He hasn't really won big yet. I do think it could be a very similar situation, George. The last time we saw a guy like this was Matt Stafford, and Cousins has won even more than Stafford did in Detroit. You get Stafford in the right situation with the Rams, won a championship. Now they're back in the playoffs after taking a couple years off. I do believe Kirk Cousins can be a quarterback on a team that wins in the playoffs, goes far, and wins you a championship. So he is the guy I would want. I know Justin Fields, other people are in rumors. If the Bears would move on from him, he then would be out there. I will say the caveat is the jobs right now are probably Washington, Seattle, Atlanta, then Carolina. But if Atlanta, and they are the most realistic to do this because Seattle still dug into Geno unless they move on from him. Washington clearly is invested in Sam Howell now, and Carolina still got an early first-round draft pick they're trying to figure something out with, so they're not going to do this either. But if Atlanta would bring in Kirk Cousins, I could argue that then being the most attractive job. I do believe in Kirk Cousins as a veteran quarterback that could turn it around, and Geno is getting a little older, so maybe that lightning is wearing off. That would then change my mind. But as we speak, without any crazy moves like that having happened, I would probably go Washington, Seattle, Atlanta, then Carolina. Carolina, we don't even need to get into it. Obviously, it's the worst job. The roster is bad. They get a lot to do there. The market's fine, but it's a small market. Unless they get a top player from college as a top draft pick and hit on it, like Cam Newton, they're generally going to be in trouble, and it's hard to bring free agents there. Yes, the division's easy, but I'm hard pressed for Carolina to win next year, year after that. So I don't like that job. The Atlanta job with Desmond Ridder at quarterback is also bad. Yeah. I mean, even if the Buccaneers bring back Baker Mayfield and he tries again there, they're already better than any of these other teams. That's why I would go back there, because they could easily win the division again. And Carr's career is probably over with the Saints, but even if he's there or they bring somebody else in, they're still probably better than Carolina. So Carolina is really in trouble. And so would Atlanta be if it's Desmond Ridder at QB. And you mentioned Robinson, George. They did what nobody does in the NFL this past year. They went running back in the first round. It's like they don't know what's going on. They're not doing a modern type of thinking system there, and Arthur Blank has tons of money. So the benefit of the Atlanta job is he will pay you a lot. There's a lot of money he can invest a lot in. That's why him and Belichick have talked a lot, and people thought Belichick would go, because if he really wants Belichick, he's going to probably overpay for him, and then Belichick probably would swing you a win or two, which maybe gets you in the playoffs. I do believe he still can help you win more games as long as he's not the GM. So that is the other caveat, that if it's Belichick, I could see it being an okay situation and Blank will pay a lot of money. But aside from that, the Washington job with the market, the new ownership group, they want to win. They want to do it the right way. There's talent that will want to play there, even though they haven't wanted to play for Dan Snyder, but otherwise they're going to want to play in Washington in that market. You could argue the name of the franchise and if they're going to change it and all that makes it a little stinky, but I think it's an historic franchise that I would want to be involved in if I was an NFL coach or an executive or a player. And Seattle, they were in the playoffs 2 years ago with Geno. You didn't even mention DK Metcalf. I mean, they got talent there. Right. I mean, the defense is potentially a question mark, but it's everywhere. So and that's a winnable division too, with Arizona going to still be bad. The Rams are getting older with Aaron Donald and Matt Stafford. How much longer can they do it? And Cooper Kupp, and Seattle could still knock on the door over there in the West. Yes. So that's still a solid job. There's tons of money there as well. So those are solid jobs. Carolina's a really, really bad one, but it depends on what happens with Kirk Cousins. If the Falcons job ends up being a good one, to pivot the volley back though to you, that's the quality of those jobs that are now open because the other ones have been filled or else they didn't fire coaches. Bill Belichick is a 6-time Super Bowl champion. He's led as a head coach to 9 Super Bowls. He's been on a staff that appeared in several others, going back to an assistant on the 96 Patriots, the time under Parcells with the Giants. Everywhere he has been, whether it be an assistant or a head coach, has won. Even when he was with Cleveland, they were a playoff caliber team before they left town. He is a successful coach all the way through. Yes, not nearly as successful without Tom Brady. The record is not nearly as good without Tom Brady, but the roster is not nearly as good as it's been the last few years since Tom Brady left, which is part of why Brady wanted to get out of there too, despite the relationship. So the roster's not been as good. He is not a great general manager. Clearly, he's only been able to bring in 2 Pro Bowlers and one of them's a punter. So he has not been a great GM. He ruined Mac Jones after one solid year. Bill O'Brien and the Funky Bunch and gives him basically no coordinator. That was bad. He is, as an executive and GM, Bill Belichick has sucked. It's like Michael Jordan as an owner. Great player, greatest of all time there, one of the worst owners ever. That's Belichick as an executive. But as a coach, if he is just coaching, I think he still coach up the defense this past year to make him competitive. He is still a solid coach. Again, the 6 rings means a lot. Brady was not elite until year 4, 5, or 6 of that run, and they won 3 rings already because Belichick coached up Brady and everybody else for that first 3 championship run there in the early 2000s. So he's done it with tons of different assistants and coordinators. He's proven a track record, to say the very least. Why is he not immediately being hired for a job if he's interviewed and if he's interested? If the Falcons do not bring in Cousins and spend all this money, he doesn't want to go to Carolina, it doesn't appear. He's not even going to interviews there. If they don't bring him in and the Chargers job is no longer open and the Cowboys job is now not open, which maybe he would fit in too, where does Belichick fit? Because he's also older. He's over 70. He's not going to go to a rebuild. He has to go into an instant, I can break Shula's record and win a 7th championship to tie Brady. If he can't do that, does he just choose to retire or sit out a year, look at it again next year? Or where does he go? Because it now feels like he's being boxed out despite having the most accomplished resume for a coach of all time.
It's strange because, and again, I'm not saying that he should take the Falcons job, but if you're the Falcons, like any team that hires him, it's going to and I'm not saying you would make the move solely for this reason, but the effect that it's going to have in terms of just juicing the energy of your fan base / selling 100%. Tickets.
Yeah, media coverage. You're going to get a national
TV. Like Wayne Gretzky playing for the Blues. Like that. It's that type of thing to me. And if you're Atlanta, where it's just kind of like they're not moribund, but they're just kind of like dragging, and Atlanta's very irrelevant. They were in the Matt Ryan years, but
yeah, I mean, we're only 5 years ago they were in the Super Bowl. It's not like it's 20 years. Right?
Yeah, it's not like they're this sad, pathetic franchise. But man, what a juice that would be.
It would be
but
a juice.
To your point, the two, I think, honest to God, I think the Seattle for Bill. I'm going to speak for Bill Belichick. I think the Seattle job, if I'm Bill Belichick, is the most alluring one because you've got a foundation, you've got a stable franchise there. You've got a franchise that has had recent-ish playoff success.
Yeah.
You know them because you played them in the Super Bowl. And in theory, and we have a yet undetermined or undefined role for what Pete Carroll is going to do, but he's still going to be involved with the organization in some capacity in the front office. So you have his wisdom there, a contemporary who I assume that Bill Belichick would respect a guy like Pete Carroll. And if
I will jump in though and say that
sure.
did you watch when Pete Carroll appeared on Richard Sherman's podcast?
No, I did not.
It does not appear. Neither one of us can speak in the position of knowing this for sure. But what you're saying about they would work well together as 2 Hall of Fame coaches, I'm not so sure. Pete Carroll,
is there more animosity than that I'm unaware
of? There's not like animosity, but Pete Carroll talked about that whenever he was coach of the Patriots, because remember, Belichick took over for Pete Carroll. So if this would happen, this would definitely be a flip to history. He took over for Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll admitted on that show that he is still in his feelings about how he was treated at New England. He did not feel that Robert Kraft, who gave Belichick the keys to the Cadillac right away and said, you can choose the dinners, you can choose the workout, you can choose the time. He flat out said Robert Kraft would not let him do any of that. And that was only a year earlier, in the several years earlier. They weren't a 2-win team. They were flirting with playoff contention with Pete Carroll, and he was unceremoniously kicked out of town, and they had to go to college for Belichick, who at the time was a former Browns coach, but was not Bill Belichick as we know him now. And it does not appear as though at least Pete Carroll does not love Robert Kraft that much in the Patriots. I don't know if he connects to a dislike of Bill Belichick, but Bill Belichick being so tied to the Patriots for so long and being the guy that eventually took over for Pete Carroll and then won big with New England. And this is not Pete Carroll's decision because as much as he fought for his job, they did a mutual parting of ways to be nice, but they basically wanted to move on. They pretty much told him we want to move on. It was almost a quasi-firing, but they're going to let him stay with the franchise. But I'm not too sure if Pete Carroll is going to love that because the guy that's going to get the wins and would get the ring would be Belichick. He'd be sitting there in an office that nobody would give him any credit. I don't know if that would be a great working relationship, to be honest with you. I'm not even so sure.
That's fair.
George,
That's
if you're
it's
Bill Belichick,
it's an angle I hadn't considered. Yeah.
And that's just going again off of these are Pete Carroll's words from when he talked to Richard Sherman on his show. Obviously, we don't hear from Bill Belichick to that regard, but I'll even flip it to you this way. If you try to be Bill Belichick for a second, if you're Bill Belichick and you're the greatest coach of all time, potentially off of your accomplishments, and you know that Pete Carroll is also Super Bowl adversary of yours and also a Hall of Famer, but not nearly to your level, is still there as an advisor in some way. Say he doesn't leave and he's still there as an advisor. It's one thing to no longer be the GM because you haven't been able to be a successful GM and you're fine with now being a coach to get Shula's record. But why do you want to have a situation where a fellow Hall of Famer is going to now tell you whether your decision in terms of coaching is right or wrong? You could easily turn around to Pete and say, Pete, I respect you, but I won 6. You won 1. I know better than you. Why are you advising me? Like, I think that's the weirdness of Belichick. That George, this has even been said before. Remember when Carmelo Anthony and those players in the NBA like that, it was tough for them to get jobs. And people would say, of course, they're still good enough to be in the league, but coaches or anonymous coaches would say to different reporters, we don't want to have a situation where I have to bench Carmelo Anthony or I have to have him on the bench late in the game and look at him and say, I'm not going to play you because you're Carmelo Anthony, a Hall of Famer. When you're at a certain level, if you no longer can be that level any longer and run the whole ship, it can make it awkward that it's almost like you're too good for jobs. You know, I don't know. Like everyone's probably had this experience. You graduate college, you have degrees, you want to move into a field before you fully embark on the career. Maybe you got to work a side job for a minute. And when you're applying for those side jobs as you're embarking on this media career, I literally had one when I was first year out. I was doing a side job in addition to calling some games and embarking on the media career. I had somebody tell me, you know, you're overqualified for this. And I'm like, I know, but I'm trying to break into media and journalism, not trying to do what you're doing. I just need some money on the side. Yeah. Maybe that's a situation that Belichick is kind of in. I mean, there's nowhere he's going to walk into that would have more rings than him.
Yeah,
Even in Dallas with Jerry Jones, they have 5. Jerry Jones has
Dallas,
3.
yeah.
I mean, that would be a similar situation there. That would have been, honestly, George, and we can get into that in a moment. That would have been the perfect situation for Belichick. Jerry Jones is 81 years old. Yeah. He's done everything under the sun. He's a Hall of Fame owner no matter what happens. It's been a long time, though, to even be in a championship game.
Him.
He obviously would respect him. And he even said he was the most surprised he's been his whole career about how they played against Green Bay. You give credit to Green Bay, but Dallas just slept through the game. They played the worst game they played all year. It was awful. It was embarrassing for the Cowboys. And you're contractually tied to a lot of guys. You're probably going to bring Dak back. You can't do much with the roster, but you should be able to get a better performance out of Micah Parsons and Dak Prescott in the playoffs. And you got to figure, if it's a short 2 or 3 year window with a lot of money coming your way, that Belichick would not have had that result against Green Bay, George. Win or lose, they would have played better. They would have been more interested. They would not have had anybody before the game, because Dak did this, leading up to the game talking about, I'm going to take my wife on this trip in Vegas because that's where the Super Bowl is. They were planning for what they're going to do when they're in Vegas at the Super Bowl when they've never been there before as a group. No way would that fly under Belichick. He would have been the perfect fit to come in there for 3 years, try to win it big, and then be done. And he probably would get in the Ring of Honor off only 2 years of work the way Jerry Jones works. And it didn't happen because Jerry Jones decided to stay with Mike McCarthy, who's won 12 games 3 years in a row, but they had that lackluster performance in the postseason. So say we won about that decision, that would have been the perfect situation for Belichick. It didn't happen. And with Harbaugh and with the Chargers, it almost feels like there is no perfect situation for Belichick anymore.
No.
Maybe Seattle is the job, but I don't think Pete Carroll is a great coup to have there to make me want to be there more if he's my advisor.
And to throw in another, I would say far outside chance, Dan Snyder would have definitely hired Bill Belichick. I don't know that Josh Harris would have. Belichick grew up in Annapolis, graduated from high school in Annapolis. His father coached at the Naval Academy. He's got deep ties to the region and specifically the state of Maryland. Commanders play in Maryland. And I could see that being weird in a Dan Snyder.
Why have there not been more rumors to him there now, post Dan Snyder?
I probably
it
just
still is everything you just said. The connections
it's
still there.
It's still all there. I'm guessing it's ownership, and that a new ownership group is looking to make its own unique mark, as opposed to
They want a younger coach,
as opposed to a very traditional mark where
yeah.
Josh Harris has been very, kind of magnanimous in bringing in outside viewpoints. He's bringing in Bob Smith, who
Bob Myers,
excuse me, who was the Golden State GM for all those years during their title dynastic run.
Yeah.
And of course, Josh Harris owns the Sixers, so he's got and the Devils, so he's got experience there.
Yeah.
But yeah, to have someone who wants to court outside viewpoints like that, I think your first coaching hire isn't going to be very traditional, and Bill Belichick will be perhaps the most traditional of coaching hires as a 6-time Super Bowl champion.
He would, but I mean, at the end of the day, I do think he'd help you win.
Yeah.
I think he still brings a win or two as a coach.
And Washington's got a weird situation where we mentioned the Sam Howell thing. Like, God bless him. Like, Sam Howell's not the quarterback of the future of this franchise. I don't care how many people.
I think they think he is, though. I don't think they're changing QBs.
I'm curious to what Harris and the personnel.
They're certainly not bringing in Kirk Cousins. Obviously, they tried that already. I mean, he's the veteran out there. They're not going to bring Kirk Cousins in.
They're not bringing in Kirk Cousins. Honest to God, they need to target. I believe they need to target somebody in the draft. I believe Ron Rivera thought that
maybe you can go get Geno because they lose the OC and Pete Carroll's gone. Maybe they don't even like
Heineke and Howell and blah 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 for as much.
I think Howell's QB1 next year. I would bet money. I think Howell's going to be the guy. Win or lose, I think they're going to go unless they bring in Belichick or something funky. If it's the same regime and they go regular with a young coach, I think Howell's going to be the QB1.
He might just be out of default, which was kind of what it was this season.
I mean, they might draft somebody, but even if they draft somebody, I would still not be surprised if they do a Steelers thing and they have him go, with Trubisky and Rudolph, and they just keep a veteran there. And then Howell, he threw yards. It's not like yards were not on the board.
And you had, 3 seasons ago now, maybe not 2, but I think 3 seasons ago, you had a good defense, one of the best defense, top 5 defense in Washington. And then that just cratered. And then you trade away your first round draft picks in Chase Young and Montez Sweat in the middle of the season. So it's a clean slate. I think the Commanders will be active in terms of trading. When the draft rolls around, they've got a bunch of cap room. I think it's like $80 million in cap room. So you've got, I think, to your point, like Bill Belichick would help them win games more so than Ron Rivera.
Especially with cap room.
With cap room, and especially with him not being the general manager. But I'm getting the gist from this ownership group and from Josh Harris and the rest of his guys, Mark Ein and everybody else, Magic Johnson and whoever, that they're just kind of, it's a very fresh approach, and that it's not going to be completely non-traditional, but that it's going to be different than the Snyder era, which was overspend on known commodities, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Snyder.
Hey, we're bringing Mike Shanahan in. Hey, here's Donovan McNabb. Like, it's not.
He brought in freaking Deion Sanders after he already had quit, and brought him in to just say, I got prime time, and he wasn't even close to what he was. Yeah. So at the end of his career, that was Dan Snyder. It was like fantasy football. He didn't know what he was doing on and off the field. But the issue, I guess, for me is Bill Belichick would be that upgrade, but it doesn't appear to be the case for him there. Yeah. Again, Carolina, he's not even interviewing because that's just such a long journey at his age that would not make sense. I do think Dallas should have moved on from Mike McCarthy and brought Bill Belichick in. I could argue that if they didn't have Bill Belichick there and he wasn't available, then I could see maybe staying with Mike McCarthy, because I will say, as much as they were awful in the playoffs, I do think Mike McCarthy does get disrespected to a certain level. I mean, the national media is defending Mike Tomlin all day. If you pull up Mike Tomlin and Mike McCarthy's resumes, George, they're almost identical. It is almost weird how similar. It is the same amount, very within 1 or 2. It is the same amount of wins, similar playoff record. McCarthy actually has more playoff wins and a better percentage there. Same amount of losses, closer to success recently. They both have won championship. McCarthy beat Mike Tomlin in the Super Bowl that he has won. Mike Tomlin does have a second Super Bowl appearance, and he does have the ring from the other game. But outside of that, and that's also over a decade ago, they're very, very, very similar, and everybody supports bringing Mike Tomlin back. Okay, yeah, they did get in the playoffs. At some point, I wouldn't mind ending the era, just because at some point you can't have a lifetime appointment. I'd like to see something move on, and not even have the same answers in press conferences and have the same thing of winning 9 or 10 games, crawling in and that being it. But they're not done with Tomlin yet. But Mike McCarthy, everybody wants fired, and I thought they should move on too for Belichick, but not for anybody else. But it's very, very similar. So I guess if you don't want to bring in Belichick, and maybe he wouldn't agree to not be the GM, maybe him and Jerry wouldn't work out, who knows? But then you might as well stay with McCarthy. But
yeah,
I'll ask you then, separate from the debates, Washington, Seattle, Atlanta, Carolina. We don't know about if Atlanta's going to bring in a veteran quarterback or not. We don't know if another job maybe somehow will open up, even though that's unlikely right now. Does Bill Belichick coach in the NFL next season? And where does he coach? And if he does not coach in the NFL, is he done for good, or does he sit out, do TV, as funny as that'll be, and then come back into coaching a year from now?
This is where Mike...
he's not going to be done for good. I cannot imagine that, but do you think he is?
It's where Mike uses my words against me here. No, I was going to bring up the point that maybe, and of course I am in no way comparing Mike McCarthy and Bill Belichick, but maybe he does a McCarthy thing where Mike McCarthy is fired late in the season. I think the Packers had 4 or 5 weeks left in the season. Sits out, didn't have any interest, wasn't courted. I believe
he waited for a job. 100%.
He waited for a job. He was tangentially tied with the Jets, and I think that's when the Jets were looking at hired Adam Gase. I think that's how long ago that was, and that of course didn't work. And so he was rumored potentially there, and then he just didn't have a job and was just out. And Mike McCarthy's not a go on TV guy, very Pittsburgh, kind of mumbles.
Hey, Belichick's been on the McAfee show, so don't say Belichick might go on TV.
Belichick, and so so
very
Belichick
underrated
is good.
Personality-wise. I get him on TV.
Belichick is good on TV.
Boring,
so I can actually see Nick Saban appears to be done. I can see him working in like front office-y, college-related something like something like that.
I would watch a Manning cast with Belichick and Nick Saban watching the game.
Yeah,
I'll watch that. But yeah,
if people recall the NFL 100 celebration for the NFL's 100th anniversary,
he was good in that. Yep.
They unveiled, the 100 best players in league history, and it was Rich Eisen and him, and they'd have different, some of those players featured that would come in there, and Chris Collinsworth as well. But man, Belichick unplugged from...
He's joking around with Brett Favre about how I didn't know what you were going to do, and I couldn't even scream for you because you're a gunslinger. Like, no, he is an underrated personality, 100%.
There's nobody who has a sense, perhaps, of the history of the NFL in our current time better than him. Specifically those like 1960s, 1950s guys, Chuck Bednarik and Otto Graham, and just guys that like most people in this generation really don't know of. If you didn't grow up on football, if you're not a student of the history of the game, like he's very good on television when you unplug him from the rigors of having to coach an 18-week season. So I do not think he is done for. I think he wants to coach again. I don't know if he'll get
15 wins away from Shula's record.
Yeah, I think the wins record hangs out there. I don't know if he's going to have this, off into the sunset, John Elway, Jerome Bettis type of exit to his career. But I do think that he can lead a team to a playoff berth, maybe a division title, give or take what division that is, looking at you, NFC South.
Atlanta again. I mean, again.
Seriously. I don't think he is done coaching, but I do at this point in time, based on the way we have discussed these, unless Arthur Blank just says, we interviewed 14 people, but of course it's you, Bill Bell, I think that the odds are probably close to even now that maybe he sits out a year, does some type of work somewhere, NFL Network, ESPN, whatever it may be, and then returns to coaching again. A lot of people have done it. Again, not putting these guys, Sean Payton, Mike McCarthy, not putting them in the same class, but those are guys who were coaches, Super Bowl champion coaches, sat out a year, came back to work and got work. So I think that based on the 4 openings that we currently have, unless there is somebody willing to fire their current coach or move on from their current coach because they want Bill Belichick that bad, and I'll put that at 5% out here because you never know. But I think the odds are that he sits out a year and, kind of gets some rest for himself after being in the grind for so long, and then can come back maybe potentially refreshed at a job next year.
Here's the only problem with what you're saying.
Sure.
The only problem, and I think it's a legit problem.
You can't tell me in 3 weeks when he gets hired, like, you were wrong. I'm hypothesizing here. I don't know.
I'm saying the only problem that you did not mention, and this is the difference. I'm not talking about resume, than Mike McCarthy or when Sean Payton was doing that, and Sean Payton eventually sat out and was traded and all of that. Because Bill Belichick's 71 years old.
Age. Yeah.
He's 71 years old. We're looking at multiple decades of a difference in terms of age from the comparisons you're bringing up. Sean Payton is a young man in comparison to Bill Belichick. Certainly, so is Mike McCarthy and a lot of the other coaches who were available or got jobs. It could very well be, George, that a lot of these franchises, whether we're talking Seattle, Washington, even Carolina, Atlanta, or certainly the Chargers, maybe they just fit with Harbaugh. Maybe they all said to themselves, maybe even Jerry Jones, the Bill Belichick hire is like a 3-year hire. If you do win big and he goes to the Super Bowl, he's probably going to retire. He's not going to want to do this forever. That would be then where his ceiling. And it's not maybe a job that even the players would love. Maybe the players don't want to do the Patriots way under a 71-year-old man if you're trying to bring in free agents. That was cool in the early 2000s when you hadn't won yet, but maybe the Bill Belichick scheme and the Patriots way does not work elsewhere, and he's also 71 years old.
This isn't college where, the Bobby Bowden, the Joe Paterno, the Nick Saban.
It's why Nick Saban didn't work with Miami. He was trying to do that in Miami, and they were like, we make more money than you. What are you doing? Go back to college.
Yeah, this isn't the 80-year-old, 70-year-old septuagenarian guy hangs around and has full control of all the levers of power there.
Yeah, at college you could just stay forever and get recruiting classes. Right.
Yeah, this is the NFL where, especially in this day and age with players having a little bit more of the power, being able to kind of dictate how some of these things go, you're going to want somebody that connects more to them. And the 70-year-old guy isn't going to connect to them as much as a contemporary, a guy who played with them or played with somebody they know. So, yeah, that could be a potential problem.
Could be a problem.
Because
and then next year, George, say he sits out a year because he'd be fantastic on TV. I'd love to see him there. Say he sits out a year. Next year, he'll be 72 years old. It's not going to be easier next year. That's another problem. Mike McCarthy and Sean Payton were still young. He would be then older, obviously, next year when he's looking for a job again. Why would a team, if they don't want him now because of age, want him next year?
Because their franchise is at such a point where they want to blow it up and make a sweeping change at the top. Who better to lead your franchise than the 6-time?
Do you think we ever get to a point? Do you think we ever get, and this would be semi-sad, but if I'm him, I would consider this if no other job was available. Do you think we ever get to a point where Bill Belichick knows the good jobs, they respect my resume, but they don't want a 71-year-old. I can go to TV, but then those good jobs, they've told me behind closed doors, they're not going to want me at 72 or 73 years old either. We don't know what'll be open next year, but his age will be increasing. Do you think he ever sits down with himself and says, look, I want Shula's record. I want it. The good jobs don't want me. I will go to Carolina and I will suck for about 5 years and I will crawl my ass.
You'll cobble it together with 4 and 6 win seasons, won't you?
Right.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Crawl to get there, and then I will get there and be celebrated for my overall career. It's not like I'm Marty Schottenheimer. I got 6 rings. Yeah, Brady won without me. But Brady's admitted he wouldn't have been great without me either in the beginning of his career. So I'm still the most accomplished coach of all time. Unless Andy Reid gets to 6, but he only has 2. That's hard to believe. So I'm pretty bulletproof. I'm Hall of Fame anyway. I will just take a bad job. And George, the other benefit of this is if he goes to Carolina and wins 8 games, he is God. So because that roster is not calling for it now. So does that ever happen? Does he ever go to sit down with himself and say, I got to take a bad job to stay in coaching, and I want Shula's record enough to do that?
That may happen if he sits out the year, because kind of as you're talking there, and I'm thinking just, in terms of just like, as we know Bill Belichick now, unchanged as he is, in terms of just a quote unquote culture fit with an organization, like that's why I bring up Seattle. Like, I think he would be a culture fit in a Seattle organization who just came off of a leader who's older.
I think it would have been Dallas too. I think
he would. I think he'd be a culture fit in Dallas with how Jerry Jones runs that franchise. I think he'd be a culture fit in a place like Pittsburgh, where they are not, very bold and rash with their decisions, and they're willing to let things play out.
Yeah, or Philadelphia, even though they're quick trigger. I mean, that would have been another ready team that he's played in a Super Bowl that has a lot of talent that's been there recently.
So
a lot of rich guys
there's only a handful of organizations that would fit, that could fit for an older coach, and specifically him.
I think Chicago, he would have fit in Chicago.
Chicago's another,
and he would have loved being there with the history of that franchise. I think that's another thing that I don't understand.
He's not a coach for the Dolphins. He's not a coach for the 49ers. He's not.
Well, old guys going to Miami to retire that doesn't happen. That's a Jimmy Johnson type of thing. He did that. Would the Giants move on from Brian Daboll and he goes back to there where he's got all that history? Yeah, and he wanted that job initially and didn't get it initially, right?
So there's only a handful of places in the league that I think he makes.
Even Cleveland, going back to Cleveland, he was there before.
But Cleveland's like actually in decent.
Well, they were a playoff, right? They're a playoff team.
Yeah,
but here's the thing. This is what I think honestly is the difference, and I think age is a factor here, George. If Bill Belichick was 61 or 51 years old with 6 rings and the legacy that he had, I believe this, and we don't know this to be true, but I believe this. The Browns, the Bears, I think even Jerry Jones, these teams that are either were hot at the end of the year, that won 12 games, the Browns got in the playoffs with Flacco. I think they all would have sat down and with their coach, and even McCarthy, who has a ring, would have said, we are not indicting you. You did a good job in all reality. We got to go get Belichick.
We can have this guy for a decade plus. Yeah.
We got to get Belichick because he can be here for a while. And I do believe at that point, Jerry Jones might even have said, Mike McCarthy gets you 12 wins. Bill Belichick wins you a Super Bowl. So that could be the difference. But at 71, they might be sitting there saying, this is not a decade. He's not going to want any draft picks. He wants basically to walk in to a championship, and maybe you do it in Philly. But if they don't move on from Sirianni, where does it happen? So, unless the NFL Goodell gets in there and kind of runs a collusion and says we got to break this Shula record here, so someone's going to have to do me a solid. But because he's so close, it would be ridiculous.
It's our latest conspiracy. The league intervenes to get Bill Parcells a head coaching job so he can break down Shula's record.
Yeah, Belichick. Yeah, that's the thing.
Bill Belichick.
I don't know. I don't. the only job that's a good one left, really. Washington, Seattle, maybe Atlanta. Probably Seattle is as ready-made now, and Atlanta if they bring in a veteran QB, but. It doesn't look like it's out there. I don't know. Do you think that hypothetically, if Atlanta brings in Kirk Cousins and hires Belichick, what does that do for the balance of power? Does that immediately make them a division favorite because the bar is only the Buccaneers? If we're talking about maybe going to Atlanta just to crawl to the wins record, if they bring in Cousins, does that then become a Belichick attractive job that he could even go to a championship?
I think they're a 10-win team at that point with the other weapons they have around him. Look what he has done with both the Vikings past and present, Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Alexander
Mattison. Are they a playoff run team? Could they make a playoff run?
Yeah. No, I think that's it. I think you can project 10 wins if it's Kirk Cousins and Bill Belichick in Atlanta. Because again, God bless Kirk Cousins. He'll go down as maybe like a misunderstood character in the history of the NFL.
He's very, very funny as well, by the way.
He's very funny. He's like quasi, he's very interesting. Thorn in the side of teams I cheer for, but dude puts up numbers. You say what you want. Like the Vikings deal is like the same problem
they had last year. The reason, right?
Yeah. Same problem they had last year, and the reason I didn't think they were going to be, have the repeat success this year is they won 13 games last year and the division, and 11 of those games they won were one-score games. And so the same thing happened to them this year, and they lost more of those one-score games. So that's not just a Kirk Cousins problem. That's stuff that trickles down and filters down the rest of the roster there when you can't get over the hump like that. So no, if you move him, you put him in, and it's in, and not a small fact. Minnesota in a dome, you see what he's doing. You stick him in Atlanta, also a
similar
situation.
That's right. That's why it would fit. Yeah.
Like, he's still going to be able to do that type of stuff that I believe he's able to do that type of stuff in Atlanta if he were to go there. So,
and honestly, George, and this might be my sales pitch to Belichick too. If I can bring in Cousins, I would,
and Minnesota doesn't seem that long on him, like that's the other,
No. And it almost seems like he wants to stay there more than they want him to be there. But the
Vikings
other
are kind of like apathetic. Like if we had another quarterback, sure.
We talked all about how Bill Belichick is such a student of the game. I could even see in his brain thinking, I literally stole a championship from Atlanta. Mm-hmm. Like if he would go there,
if he rides into town
and would win them a Super Bowl after he was the coach that came back from down 28-3, that would literally repair 28-3. They would forget it if he wins that there. And dare I say, George, to compare it to Matthew Stafford again, and this would really get in your craw. If he goes to Atlanta with Kirk Cousins and they win a ring, Kirk Cousins is going to the Hall of Fame. If you look at his numbers, where he's going to be, you got to project that about 2 or 3 more years.
By the end of his career,
it's going to be almost. I'm going to put you this way: everyone agrees Matthew Stafford's in, so you're going to be taking Stafford out if you're putting. If you're not going to put Cousins in, it'll be the same. So it could. It'll be interesting, but if not Atlanta, I don't know where.
And I'll throw out as we round out the NFL portion of the program here that. I think Carolina should hire Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel is a good head coach in this league.
I don't know if Tennessee should have fired him. They shouldn't have fired him.
I don't know if Tennessee should have fired him, but the way he took, I don't want to call it complete garbage because, Derrick Henry, but like mostly surrounding Derrick Henry, it was kind of very mid, a lesser caliber roster, and you led Ryan Tannehill with like 7 pass completions a game, and that drug that team to the AFC Championship game and nearly to a Super Bowl, and dealt Tom Brady his loss in his final game as a Patriot in the playoffs. Like Mike Vrabel's done. He out Belichick as a Belichick disciple. Like he is a good coach. He needs to be a head coach in this league. I think
Atlanta's interviewed him too.
Yeah, Atlanta's.
He could go to Atlanta instead of Belichick.
Yeah, he could. Yeah. So I say Carolina because I think he would actually help turn around Carolina, and his no nonsense, style would jive well enough with David Tepper. God bless Frank Reich, for a former Terp and everything, but like him being kind of a more of a conservative, chill dude, traditional, quiet kind of guy, not jiving with David Tepper, who's a bit of a hothead.
That's the reason why I would not.
Mike Vrabel and David Tepper could pound drinks together.
The reason why I wouldn't wish that on Vrabel is because
I don't wish it on him, but I think they would work. I think they would jive. I really do.
Well, the problem is, George, Carolina's, as you said, Carolina doesn't give you a year. They give you like 3 months to figure it out.
Yeah.
They're firing guys.
They'll have to have a winning record by November.
It's totally unfair. You can say you don't want Frank right there and don't think he was the right fit, but to fire anybody within a year or even after 1 year in the NFL
with a number 1 overall draft pick, which is very traditional to have that type of failure.
It's unreasonable. Like, what do you think was going to happen there? What were they trying to do? They're mad they didn't win 10 games with a number 1 pick, and it's not even just the number 1 pick. Chris McCaffrey's long gone.
You want to fire him after the season? I can half understand that, but what do you get? 6 games, 7 games? Like, okay, then you weren't committed to him at all, and you just hired him.
There was no point of doing it
3 months ago.
Christian McCaffrey's in San Francisco. You have a number 1 draft pick as your QB. Nobody could even name anyone on defense. You weren't supposed to win.
Yeah.
Bill Belichick last year would not have won with Carolina. That's why he doesn't want to interview there now.
Gave your other draft pick to the Bears, So
that's insane. So if that's the ownership, and I just got fired by a job that I was winning, I would be concerned going there if I'm Vrabel.
Oh, I would 100% be concerned if he does not get the Atlanta job. Mike Vrabel, I think, would be a good fit in any of these 4 places. I think
Washington would be great with him because he would fit that mentality and would turn that around, and they're closer than Carolina.
You need a strong personality. They're closer than Carolina. You need a strong personality in that job. Like Jay Gruden,
I think Harris would even like him in an interview. I think that would work. I think I would rather be there if I was him.
Ron Rivera, God bless him, riverboat. You got the end of the riverboat, and the stern wheel on the back of the boat was, collapsing and falling into the Potomac as he got here. So he was not the same Ron Rivera. No, Mike Vrabel would be a good fit in Washington. But I think David Tepper should hire him, because I think I see a lot of the same characteristics in David Tepper as I do in Vrabel, and Vrabel might be the one coach that won't put up with his BS as an owner who's trying to meddle in the everyday operations of the football team.
Maybe when Tepper goes in there and says Game 6, you're fired, he would say, "No, I'm not. This is my team."
Exactly.
He would refuse to leave, and they'd have to physically remove him, and that would be hilarious. And maybe. Although you call Jay Gruden milquetoast, he is, except for on Twitter these days.
Apparently, yeah. No, he decided to go fine on Twitter.
Yeah. He got a personality right now, and because he kind of shut RG3 down, and RG3 was a little funny with his rebuttal. But then Jay Gruden basically gave the final word that I didn't see RG3 reply to, where he basically said, "Yeah, but you sucked." I mean, Jay Gruden grew a pair on social media. I'm sure not in person, but yeah, Washington needs some type of non-drama personality, strong leadership there for sure. Seattle probably needs the same. It would be they probably do want something different than Pete Carroll, who was everybody's fun uncle, even though they won. We'll see what these teams do. I wouldn't be shocked if Washington, Seattle, maybe Carolina's forced to go this way. They all kind of go young. Belichick only really fits with Atlanta unless they bring in Cousins. Maybe they don't want to do it. So maybe he does end up sitting out a year. But I hope he does eventually get back into coaching. I hope he does coach a team next year. Guy is right there at Shula's record. It's 2 seasons away realistically. It should happen. It should not happen because of his age or because of what's going on here and because of the way the Patriots thing ended. He can't be a GM, but he certainly can still coach ball. So it's a funky end where they had a weird press conference where after they agreed to mutually part ways, Robert Kraft had answered questions from the media in which they said, "Well, what could have changed your mind in terms of keeping Bill?" And Kraft had to dance around that because he just 2 minutes ago said they parted ways and he didn't fire him. So it'll be interesting too if Gerard Mayo gets a fair crack there because he's replacing Belichick. That's almost impossible to do so there. And he had his opening press conference. He was discussing race relations. I don't see that working. I don't see that working. But all the best to him there. And
we give him a chance. Yeah, didn't think Antonio Pierce was going to work. That worked for the minimum small sample size we have. But
it's easier to replace the guy that replaced the guy than it is to replace the guy.
And New England's problems extend beyond just who's the coach, obviously. So.
Because of Bill. Yeah, they have no roster basically there. But we will see. I do hope Bill is eventually coaching somewhere. And if it is Atlanta with Kirk Cousins, I think that will work. Almost any of the other options, he'll get the wins record, but I don't see winning big anywhere else, at least within that 2-3 year window with his age.
Let's take a quick timeout here on the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show. The coaching carousel spins further after the break. This time it's
really asinine now.
It gets this was like
the most asinine part of it.
This was the serious analysis, actual measured take portion of the program. Now it gets stupid as we talk about the NBA after the break. That's next here on the HBS. I'll just wait a second. Man. Welcome back inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show. George the Howitzer Gerbo.
Mike the Buzzsaw. Got to get some pineapple juice. I do have it upstairs, actually. I do need to.
He needs a pineapple
I need to fix the pipes.
Pineapple break is never a bad bad thing. I haven't had some in a while just because I need to get out and get fruit here in the winter. The only things that remind me of how warmth and sunshine. So pineapple juice is one of those. I digress. A place where there's not, there is kind of pineapples and sunshine, but not if you're a coach, and that's Milwaukee, who is one of the best teams in the NBA once again after their blockbuster edition over the summer of Damian Lillard. And they're a plus 30 win team. They are, again, on track for another playoff appearance and potentially a 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They've separated themselves as being one of the class teams in the NBA once again. And after firing Mike Budenholzer, who even in the year that they won the NBA championship, were questions about whether he would be fired during those playoffs or after those playoffs if they lost early.
Literally, Kevin Durant's toe saved his job, and he won a championship.
Kevin Durant's toe saving a lot of people out here.
Further back a little bit, and that was a 3. He probably would have been fired then. Yeah.
So they move on from Bud, and they hire Adrian Griffin at the start of this season. And if you've read between the lines a little bit in some of these Bucks games, and it's funny to watch some of the clips come out now where Giannis Antetokounmpo and some of the other players are just, kind of doing some of the coaching in the huddle. And so for whatever reason, it didn't jive there. So they fire Adrian Griffin a mere 2 days ago. And within 48 hours, they have settled on back in the NBA like a friggin' vampire. You can't kill him unless you drive a stake through his poor coaching heart. It's Doc Rivers. He's back once again. ESPN couldn't hold him. We thought we sent him. He did great. I complimented him. He did well, and I enjoyed him on ESPN, him and Doris Burke, after they eschewed Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson.
Yeah, and I was upset about Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, but Doc Rivers has filled in well. Yeah.
Disagree with that for other reasons, but yes, here to save the day comes Doc Rivers and his hoarse voice and Doris Burke. And he was actually very engaging and entertaining on television.
And I thought the voice would annoy me, but it didn't bother me as much.
It did not when he didn't have to worry about defending Blake Griffin and Joel Embiid and their bad play. And yet here we go again with Doc Rivers back in the NBA, not coaching his son, but in Milwaukee of all places. And we have to go through this again. And it's like,
and George, after he was a special advisor to Milwaukee this year.
Yes, that helped hire Griffin. Yeah.
So that's why this is asinine. It almost feels like
a coup d'etat is what it feels like.
What was his advisement? Fire him and hire me? Was that the advising that he was doing? What kind of advising was that? Yeah, it feels like
he leaves ESPN in a lurch. Like they've said they're not going to hire per Barry Jackson, Miami Herald reporter. They're not going to bring back Jeff Van Gundy, which they should. They're not going to bring back Jeff Van Gundy or Mark Jackson. It's just ridiculous, man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
so
Mark
here we
Jackson
are. We're
can't get work anywhere. But I again.
We're now stuck with Doc Rivers. There's obviously something in there, Mike, that
I'm not surprised. I will say I'm not surprised at all, because this is where the NBA works. You have a coach, and they bring this up every time he talked Doc Rivers. He does have a championship pedigree, even though it is a decade and a half ago. And I totally get, since the championship, he's literally suffered more Game 7 losses than any coach in league history.
Championship was arguably the beginning of his coaching career, honestly. At least it feels like it to me.
Disappointed. You would think that all these Game 7 losses, teams would eventually say, okay, the Doc Rivers experiment is over. He's probably going to go to the Hall of Fame even if he didn't coach the Bucks, because of what he did with the Big Three Celtics, and he did get all these playoff runs. So let him go there and be done. He's still relatively young, though, and when you have a veteran team that is in win-now mode, and when you bring in Damian Lillard to a team that won a championship 2 years ago with Giannis, who's still the best player in basketball, or one of, you're in win-now mode. When you're in win-now mode, generally speaking, you are better suited to have a veteran coach. We've seen this before, even when
they were actually winning now, though, is like the weird part about it.
Yeah,
like it wasn't.
We've seen this, though, even when teams are winning. We've seen this with
David Blatt in the Cavaliers a few years ago, and they brought in Ty Lue.
David Blatt was
a younger guy.
David Blatt was fired in the middle of a season. They were a top team in the Eastern Conference. George, unlike this situation with Griffin, David Blatt the year before led him to the finals.
Yeah.
So David Blatt had an NBA success just a year earlier. He had a little bit more time there. Stan Van Gundy, Jeff Van Gundy's brother, was sitting down there in Miami. They were a good team. They were a playoff team. And then Pat Riley pulls the strings and makes himself the head coach, takes over. They win a championship in 2006. So we have seen this before this century, and most recently with David Blatt being fired in the middle of a year with the Cavaliers. But George, the difference here is the Cavaliers promoted an assistant in Tyronn Lue, who then they won a championship with, and they built up his career. And now he was an advisor, but this is taking somebody on the outside who's not on the coaching staff and putting him on a veteran team. You could argue, I do feel Doc Rivers' career as a coach, George, even though it'll probably get him in the Hall of Fame someday, is overrated. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You got to look at it this way. Yes, he has a championship, and that's hard to do. 2008, he won that championship with the Big Three Celtics, George. Arguably Big Four now if you include Rondo. That was 2 years before the Big Three Miami Heat. When he won with that Celtics team, there were no other Big Threes. They were a stacked roster that now, if you include Rondo, is going to have 4 Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
So he got to another finals. So 2 finals, 1 ring with a stacked roster. Prior to that in Orlando, didn't win. After that, with the Clippers, he built them up because they weren't a contender prior. You give him credit for that. But couldn't get over the hump. Arguably underachieved with tons of talent. Tons of drama there. Didn't work. He's eventually gone. Philadelphia. They were losing in the second round before Doc Rivers. They didn't need Doc Rivers to come in and lose in the second round again. Okay? If he took them to the conference finals, I could see something. But he did the same thing that his predecessor did. And it was another Game 7 loss.
Kawhi Leonard.
And then now you get the scenario of going to the Bucks. I do get, while Doc Rivers is overrated career-wise, having a Hall of Fame veteran coach with a championship on his resume with a veteran win-now team makes more sense than having an inexperienced first-year head coach. I get it. And Griff was hired prior to even bringing in Damian Lillard. I get all that. But this just feels murky and asinine. And the Bucks are going to lose in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals this year. So get ready for it.
In now. Yeah, it's going to happen. Game 7 somewhere in the playoffs. The Bucks are going to lose. Yeah, to your point, I think there is still stuff that either, whether it's mid-season through sources and reporting or whatever, or after the season, that's going to trickle out, because in a very similar situation to David Blatt in Cleveland, where of course LeBron had very much a lot of control in how the direction of the franchise operated and who his teammates were and whatnot. We've seen Giannis with the willing cooperation of Milwaukee ownership, and rightfully so. You want to keep a guy like that in your fold. Giannis being able to call some of the shots and direction, incling having his 3 brothers in the
that was part of him staying, though. And
all 3 brothers are there as part of the franchise. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see if something comes out, it gets teased out further about just maybe not like a hostile work environment, but just a work environment, just something that wasn't conducive and just players weren't having it for whatever reason.
Or did Giannis go to management like Magic Johnson did many, many years ago and basically say, I want him gone? I mean, Giannis would be able to pull those strings. He'd have the cachet after re-signing there. Many thought even after he won a championship that he would not re-sign there, George, that he decided to stay in there. He won a championship that Milwaukee had not experienced in decades, 40 plus years prior to that, since Kareem. So
I feel for
he has cachet.
I feel for Griffin for the aforementioned. Doc Rivers kind of was the advisor that set him up, and eventually he comes and takes his job.
That's what's ridiculous. The advisor taking over is not that looks like shit. I mean, that's ridiculous.
And B, he's the first NBA coach fired this season after winning 30 plus games and having a good record, where you have Detroit, who spent a Brinks truck and more, $70 million plus for Monty Williams to come there. And they are the worst team in the NBA, have only won 4 games, and they have the record now for the worst losing streak in NBA history.
You want him fired year 1? Is that what you're looking for?
They're historically bad.
But George, it's not like he had the Phoenix roster. What will you expect there? It's the Carolina Panthers situation.
I would also fire maybe less deserving than Monty Williams, since you gave him all that money, or more deserving than Monty Williams since you gave him the money, is Wes Unseld Jr. in DC. Who the Wizards only have 7 wins, are a complete garbage franchise.
They are garbage.
They're a joke. They don't even look like they're just there to get paid at this point.
They still can't attract free agents. They can get on a trade, but that's
can't attract free agents. Oh, Jordan Poole this, but Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma, who are role players.
They're role players
for the rest of their lives in the NBA, are leading this team, and it's about as bad as you'd expect it to be. So yeah,
they're role players.
Wes Unseld Jr. should be fired, and the Wizards need to start over. But Ted Leonsis is, foolhardy when it comes to some of this stuff. But yeah, to be a guy that won 30 games in your first year, I get it's the Bucks. I get like it's taking the keys to the Rolls Royce and getting to drive around.
He was given the job prior to Dame, though, and the Dame coming changes it. What if Dame doesn't even like him? He had the job prior to Dame.
Yes.
Does that not? That's not part of it for you. He had the job prior to Dame. The team is now led by Dame and Giannis, including Dame.
Oh yeah.
Prior to Dame.
So I mean, I think kind of to your point, it seems like there's some sort of corporate buy-in that everybody was, there was something off somewhere in the line that I think we're going to find out eventually. I don't think. Well, to your point, Giannis could go
resign before the season, and the rumors are that that's because him and Griff could not get along.
Yeah,
that's a veteran coach who said I quit.
And Terry Stotts is well respected, and was Dame's coach in Portland for a long time.
So he resigned prior to the season with Dame there. That tells me there's drama there.
That tells me that there's something that, we're in the same way that we didn't. In the same way that I'm comparing apples and oranges here, so bear with me. But in the same way that we didn't know all that was going on with Ime Udoka in Boston, this team is doing good, but he's having sexual affairs with people in the workplace there. I'm not saying.
Although he has another job already too. He has
another job down in Houston. Yeah,
right.
I'm obviously not saying that's the case with Griffin, but there is something behind the scenes that just the culture, the workplace culture, the locker room culture was so unbearable for these players that.
But that's what it feels like.
Even with 30 wins in halfway through the season, that you're one of the best teams record-wise and performance-wise, and they were just done with the guy.
See, I agree. It's probably the case. Probably. But what I'll ask you to do, I'm going to pigeonhole you like you don't like when I pigeonhole you. Hypothetically speaking.
Yeah.
Because, George, I think you would agree. If what you're saying is correct, do you agree we will know about it within the next year?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So my question then to you is,
they'll get teased out. Yeah.
If none of that is reported,
okay,
and there are no reports from legitimate media members about any type of drama, any type of abuse, any type of harassment, any type of even arguments with Dame or Giannis, and the only answer they have for you is they wanted a veteran coach with a veteran team, do you then feel like they screwed over the first-year head coach?
That, and I feel like I'm being misled. Yes.
What's your time frame? Are you got to get a date? Are we get a 1-year anniversary, January 24th, 2025? You got to have some information.
We should know. I think we'll know this offseason, honestly.
Okay,
I think
so you're looking like by like July 4th. You got to know this information.
Like July or August. Yeah, sometime between July and the beginning of July, August, September.
We should know. I'm just saying that we should know. But hypothetically, that doesn't exist. With David Blatt, George, there's no drama about David Blatt. They just fired him.
Yeah, but there was always that was kind of like.
They went to the finals with David Blatt.
They went to the finals, but even then you could tell that was a guy, they brought him in. He was a coach in Israel.
They brought him in before LeBron.
They brought him in before LeBron came back. He didn't have NBA head coaching experience. He was a successful coach in Israel, but
but they just went to the finals. They went to the finals, though.
They just went to the finals, but you could just tell there was this jive of, they could use a new guy there. Not that they wouldn't have made the playoffs with David Blatt. Not even that they wouldn't have gone back to the finals.
They might have went to the finals with David Blatt. LeBron was dragging teams at that point.
Yeah,
right.
So it was just like you could tell with him being there before LeBron, not tension, but just like, hey, he's not the guy that LeBron wants. That's just how it felt as an observer.
Sure, but why could that not be then? That the case maybe here. Griffin's not the guy that Giannis and Dame want. Maybe that was it.
It could be as simple as that. It really could. But you would think that
because you're doing the Buzzspiracy thing right now, you're making up a drama that we admit we don't know. Maybe it was just that he's not the
when you do the advisory thing, that's like kind of where the Buzzspiracy comes in. Like when you do the we're gonna have an advisor and we're gonna kind of vet here and whatever. Because again, Mike Budenholzer wasn't a bad coach, but it just kind of like some weird decision making and didn't fit with the culture again. But so you bring this guy in.
But you're firing a coach that won a champ.
I say it because I know that Dame wasn't on the team, but I say it because presumably Giannis had some input into this decision.
No. The reports are Windhurst reported that they interviewed multiple guys after Bud was fired, and that Giannis picked Griffin. That's reporting from Windhurst.
So now
he could have changed his mind.
Fair, but like I got bad faith in Giannis for not being a good decision maker. Then, like that's why.
Well, George Gerbo, we just talked about how Bill Belichick's the greatest coach of all time, but maybe the worst executive of all time. Possibly the Giannis is the great executive.
LeBron came into a situation and didn't have a pre-existing relationship with David Blatt. Giannis presumably starts this. Okay, this is the guy I want to play for. This guy. I would suggest you move forward with him.
But he hadn't played for him yet, so maybe they. Because I guess the argument for pulling this trigger now,
and we got a lot of people making bad decisions if after 40 games and we've won, 80% of them, that we want to get rid of the guy.
Well, because what I've heard from people,
it'd be a whole lot easier if they sucked him. We're like the 8th seed and they needed to make a change.
But sure. But what I've heard from people, which is why it's similar to Blatt, is the Cavaliers felt at the time that yes, Tyronn Lue was LeBron's guy and that Blatt led you to the finals, but Blatt was not the guy to get you over the hump and eventually beat the Warriors and win a championship, which Tyronn Lue and LeBron together did accomplish. Similar to this, there are some now saying, including again Brian Windhurst again, who have said that while the record shows them winning, so it's weird to fire a coach when you have the second best record in the NBA, that they also were the 22nd ranked defense, and the way they were winning, they beat Detroit by single digits. You brought up Detroit. Mm-hmm. Everyone beats them by 30. They beat them by, I think, 9. That's not – maybe they felt like, okay, we can coast into the playoffs as a top 4 seed the way we are, but
they have not been steamrolling teams as much this year to that point.
So maybe they
winning games, but not like overwhelmingly.
So maybe they felt, George, that they would win, literally speaking, but would not win a championship this way. And to be fair to Griffin, a first-year head coach getting on a roster that is win now and win a championship this year or it's a failure is a really hard place to start. And that's the situation there. They don't want to wait 2 or 3 years from now. They want to win right now. They weren't building to that. What I would say as the rebuttal to that, though, in the defense of Griffin again, okay, George, your defense is not as good this year to last year and the year before when you won a title. You basically traded, for all intents and purposes, Drew Holiday for Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard is one of the greatest shooters of all time. Doesn't really play D. Drew Holiday is a defensive specialist. Obviously, your defense would be worse. Mm-hmm. Why is that a criticism or a surprise? You could argue 2 things are true. What I'm saying is, I do think that they did not put Griffin in a position to succeed and screwed him over.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, I feel this decision actually might make some sense in terms of trying to win a title this year, at least firing him. Now, bringing in Doc Rivers is a whole different can of worms, but I could see moving on from Griffin.
I think that we're going to find out in the offseason. Again, nothing nefarious, but just like something didn't jive in the locker room. Practices were off, something,
all right. Well, then I guess, all right. I mean, if that's the case, then it all makes sense. There's no debate. If that's not the case, I would still understand it because I don't think they're a championship team right now, even though they are winning.
Put it this way. If that's not the case, then I'm gonna go buzz whatever here. I'm channeling you. Then they've got to go and win the title this year because you're.
But that's why they're doing this. That's why the point.
Yeah. Of course, in principle, it's why you're doing it. But they've got to do it because you're telling me Giannis had input and helped select Griffin the first time around, and now, in theory, Giannis helps or is a leading driving force. Potentially with Dame Lillard, again, hypotheticals here.
But to be fair, no one's reported that Giannis is part of the reasoning here, though. The reports are that he wanted to hire the guy 6 months ago, but Windhurst has not said that Giannis.
They changed their coach in the middle of the season, and one of the star players in the NBA who helped get him hired isn't part of the reason.
I'm just saying when
ownership just looks and be like, we got 40 wins, like.
I'm just saying that's not necessarily the report though on the other end. The one is a report. Brinhurst has reported that Giannis hired him initially. He has not reported that Giannis was part of the firing.
Yeah. So my conspiracy is if you're going to help get the guy hired and then help to get the guy fired, you better get it right with the hire on the second 100%. Time. And if you're behind Doc Rivers, then you go win the title with Doc Rivers.
You know what my question is? You know what I would ask then?
Because like you said, they're on this little glide path trajectory to be in the playoffs, and we're going to be a 1, 2, or 3 seed.
Yeah, guarantee it.
Barring any kind of injury. And then you get in the playoffs and you see what happens. And as we know in the NBA, no lower seed upsets one of the top 3 seeds. Just doesn't happen.
Unless they're Milwaukee lost last year to an 8 seed.
Yes. Miami being the one. That's a good fair.
But Milwaukee is the team that did it, though. It just was last year. We're not talking about 1994.
Yes.
Last year, this happened to Milwaukee. That is why we're moving on, and that's why they bring in Damian Lillard. So what I'm saying is, I do believe they were built and we're going to be a 1 or a 2 or a 3 seed again, sleeping. They could get a 1, 2, or 3 seed just off roster alone. However, I do not think the way they were playing was going to win a championship. And I will say this to be true. There is literally no point in mortgaging your future and ruining your legacy of Drew Holiday, who won you a title, who's now in his feelings about Milwaukee.
Yeah.
To bring in Damian Lillard, unless you're trying to win a championship right now. So they may have thought to themselves, for us to get to the next level and win a championship again, and with this group with Dame, Griffin's not the guy. Like, Dame can score without Griffin there. Doesn't matter who's the coach. He can score. Yes. Defensively, they were worse. They got to get better defensively. Even in the Game 7 losses, Doc Rivers is a great defensive mind. And he has won a championship a long time ago. The horrible thing about this for people that think Doc Rivers is overrated, George, if they finish the job and win a title, Doc Rivers goes to crawling in the Hall of Fame to like way moving in another category. He's going to have 2 rings. He's already overrated with 1. Can you imagine if he would win a second one? He would be on every show for the next 40 years talking about both titles. So, George, Doc Rivers has managed to make a lot of money, get himself in the Hall of Fame, and really get a lot of fame off that one championship. He was on with KG and Paul Pierce on a podcast 2 weeks ago talking about the 2008 championship.
Mm-hmm.
That championship,
those guys have squeezed every last KG parlayed it into television appearances, like they area 42 or whatever on TNT.
That championship, and obviously they went to another finals, and the Celtics were in the finals with Ime Udoka, as you mentioned, but a couple of years ago. But man, I mean that he really has squeezed all the juice out of that one thing. So maybe he'll get a second. I guess I'll ask you this, George, as we round out the show. Regardless of the reasoning around the Griffin firing, they wanted to move on, whether it be off drama or because they just weren't championship caliber. And maybe I could argue that they should have just then hired Doc Rivers over the summer. If they need a veteran coach and they love Doc Rivers so much, you might as well just hire Doc Rivers 6 months ago. They didn't do that. If we both agree Doc Rivers is overrated, I want to ask you, because you believe there's a conspiracy here. So this is my question to you. If you were the ownership of the Bucks, and you're faced with a drama and a conspiracy and some dirty things going on, and you got to fire Griffin despite a second overall record in the NBA, and you agree that Doc Rivers is overrated and you don't want to hire Doc Rivers as the head coach, who then is your head coach?
Yes, therein lies the problem. NBA,
because you are a conspiracy believer and a believer that Doc Rivers is overrated. George Gerbos, but after he just left, that would be hilarious.
This is the ridiculous. So this happens more. Friend of the program, Ryan, and I have this discussion all the time. Like, the NBA is such retread head coach city.
Oh yeah, that's Doc Rivers' life.
And if it's not retread head coach guy, then it's going to be player who had a decent career that has never had any kind of coaching experience. Shout out to the NFL, because guys can legitimately work their way up from quality control analysts the quarterback coach to the tight end coach to an offensive coordinator to being a head coach.
Yeah, I mean, the only NBA example is Eric Spoelstra. That's
it. The NBA coaches, Jason Kidd retires and now he's coaching. Steve Nash retires and now he's just.
I mean, hell, Steve Kerr retired and then he was a GM and then he became a coach.
Kerr was on television. GM, yeah. If Charles Barkley said he wanted to coach, he'd have a job tomorrow. Like it's just, So the NBA is just really weird in this. Like we've heard of you.
Smith should coach. Honestly, I feel like he could coach.
Yeah, I'm about to say So
I don't know.
To your point, we do not have a good alternative there.
It's NHL stuff. This is what the NHL does too with retreads. Patrick Waugh is freaking coaching a team. I mean,
exactly, perfect. Yeah. I say Terry Stotts. Obviously, he just left there. Yeah, that's the weird part. But
in all seriousness, Terry Stotts is an offensive guy. If you want to fix the defense and you don't want Doc Rivers, it almost feels like regardless of him being the advisor, so it is murky. He's the guy that's available.
I'm going back to like retread guys who have been head coaches who are like assistants. So it's like Terry Stotts, it's Scotty Brooks, who's in Portland. There's one, Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups is coaching.
He just got to Portland though.
No. I'm saying not take Chauncey Billups. I'm just saying Chauncey Billups is coaching the Portland Trail Blazers. Point guard, no coaching experience. Scott Brooks, who's coached two NBA teams now, including a big three himself in Oklahoma City, is now the assistant there. Like it's just NBA is goofy, weird like that. Where to your point, maybe Doc Rivers is the best available option at this point.
I don't think there's another guy. That's right.
Only for the fact that he's just on TV and doesn't have a job. Mark Jackson. Everybody but like,
why couldn't Mark Jackson or Jeff Van Gundy get back in the league? They're the ones who are not retreaded ever.
I think Jeff Van Gundy back in the league would be great. I think Stan Van Gundy back in the league. I think that would be great.
George, why not? As much as the NBA is all about retread, Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, and Stan Van Gundy cannot get back in the league. There is something going on.
The unfortunate thing, Mark Jackson, God bless him, like got torpedoed by the fact that you had the Golden State Warriors dynasty in your hands and could not turn them into a dynasty. And the minute you're fired, like you said, here comes Steve Kerr from television / general managing, and then takes them on a wild ride.
Yeah,
like
but
we hadn't seen in NBA
and no
history
shade to Steve Kerr. He's one of the greatest coaches ever. But you could absolutely argue that if Mark Jackson was still there, they might have won with him.
That's fair.
I mean, he built them up to that point.
Yes,
they didn't give him a chance because he wasn't friends with the owner.
100% correct.
They might have won with him.
Unfortunately, Steve Kerr's success torpedoes Mark Jackson's reputation as you had all of this. Why didn't you win? When, to your point, maybe they were just like needed another year.
It's just weird that happens to Mark Jackson, though, because, for example, I'll give you another sport example that's very similar. Buck Showalter's getting jobs left and right. Every time he leaves, they win a World Series. But he gets jobs every. He had the Yankees right there. They lose to Griffey and the Mariners. They fire him. Joe Torre comes in. They're a dynasty. And then he wins 100 games with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Are only a few years into being a franchise. Yep. He's out. Weird. 100 games. Why would he be out? Win the World Series the next year. So that's the thing. And same thing.
Took Baltimore to an American League Championship Series that they lost to the Royals.
And the plan is, I would recommend firing Buck Showalter. And what will end up happening a year or two later is you will win a World Series. That is generally the plan. Yeah, that is generally, and the Mets, that is generally what you do. You go there, you fire, you get better. Maybe that'll happen everywhere he goes or has been. But that's the issue. It looks murky. It's crappy. Doc Rivers is clearly working behind the scenes. Maybe he's not the best guy that everyone thinks he is. He's an overrated coach for me. All these Game 7 losses despite the one ring. It's a long damn time ago that he won the title. And George, I can name about 15 other coaches that I think would have won with the Big Three Heat, or the Big Three Celtics. There was no other Big Threes, and they had a Big Four. It was ridiculous.
Larry Bird could have coached the Celtics.
So point of it is, based on what you're saying, he should have got the job. Former player get the job, but he's living off that one ring a decade plus ago. All Game 7 losses since, the most ever. I think Doc Rivers is overrated. I think they're going to go ahead and lose in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals now. But if you got to move on from Griffin mid-season despite winning, who else would you hire for a veteran team that's in win-now mode? I could argue, George, that if I'm Doc Rivers, talking about picking your spots like Belichick maybe is best to sit out, it's a little risky. He goes there and loses in Game 7. His legacy is done. Like, he has pressure on him to win now. Damian Lillard had pressure on him to win now. Giannis, who already has a ring, now, based on what you're saying, has new pressure to win again because maybe he forced the coach out. Mm-hmm. They got a lot of pressure for a franchise that just won 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm trying to conjure up the name and like a name of like the situation just seems like to that again to make the comparison again to the Cavaliers where it's former recent player, not guy, yes, who's a veteran coach and has all the experience and has the NBA title, but like if you're going to fire the guy that you kind of handpicked.
Well, who is this guy you're talking? There's no one else out there right now.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I cannot give you an actual name. I cannot think of an actual name.
I don't think there's a former player that's ready to coach mid-season.
That's kind of the point. Yeah, like Ty Lue wasn't, like you said, Ty Lue was an assistant on that Cavaliers staff and then assumed the role. Yeah. Sam Cassell. Again, I'm scraping for bottom of the barrel here, but it just seems like if you didn't like the Griffin as a coach, then you would not go to a more quote unquote traditional coach like Doc Rivers.
I think you would, though. I actually disagree because I think that if you do not like a first year head coach because you were in win now mode and you think he's not ready for the big time, why would you not then want to replace that with a veteran head coach? You keep bringing up the Cleveland experience. I think what this is more comparable to, and it was more in-house, guy taking over, but this is more comparable to the 2006 Heat. Stan Van Gundy had them as a playoff team as a top 4 seed, and Pat Riley said, I'm taking over, because he had the cachet to walk in the room with LeBron and say, I got a resume just as good as yours, if not better.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case that Stan Van Gundy had, and he has since said he thought he needed somebody in the room to be able to be equal with LeBron. You could argue that Giannis and Dame maybe need somebody to stand up to them, and Doc can say, yeah, my ring's a long time ago. But
maybe it's the alternative that the players don't need more reign and more direction, but the players need to be reined in a little bit.
Could be.
And
and maybe the franchise feels that way. And maybe, what Doc could easily say, guys, you want to make, to Dame, certainly, who wasn't there when Griffin was hired. Maybe Dame didn't like Griffin. I mean, Doc could go into Dame and say, you want to make fun of all my Game 7 losses. How many have you been in? Oh, that's right. You were sitting home on a horrible team last year. Oh, that's right. You barely can get out of the first round. Oh, that's right. You have one deep playoff run of your whole life, even though I have one ring. Like, what are you talking about? You don't want to trust me. My resume is way better than yours. He can go to Giannis and say, yeah, you won for this franchise a couple years ago when you won them that championship, but this is a new group now, and that one ring is still one ring. It's the same I got. We got a lot of pressure on ourselves. Let's try to do this together. And maybe you need that veteran mind with more of an iron fist personality and a resume that's going to be a Hall of Fame resume at some point, even though I do agree it's overrated. But still, it's better than Griffin's. Maybe you need that in there more than a first-year head coach or a former player, etc. And you also can't get any of those guys mid-season. And it would be impossible for a former player to try to start his career as a coach in the middle of a year. So this might be the only guy that could come in on a ready-made roster mid-season with not being on the staff to take over. I do think it's not going to result in a championship because, George, I can just go to the example of every season except for 2008 and all of the Game 7 losses in recent memory. But there's a lot of pressure on Doc now, a lot of pressure on Dame, and a lot of pressure on Giannis. So we'll see what happens. But this feels really, really crappy. And I think if I'm Griffin, George, I send a pretty mean text to Doc Rivers being like, what the hell did you do to basically get me fired and take my job in the middle of a year in which I'm winning? It just looks bad. We'll see how it ends.
Bizarre.
But
find the details.
But Doc Rivers never can say he doesn't have enough talent when he's been on these teams. I mean, my Lord, he gets good jobs. And I'm sure if this doesn't work out, George, he'll get another one too. I'm sure he'll get another one. Doc Rivers is just destined to be a cockroach in the NBA and get an NBA job every year.
That will put a little nice asinine bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. A reminder that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, YouTube, Google, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. Just search Howitzer or Howitzer Buzzsaw in your favorite podcast app. Follow us, subscribe for free. Also, a shout out to the Hyphen Podcast Group, hyphenpodcastgroup.com, a Morgantown-based podcast collective that we are a part of. And as always, Kellen B. Conley, thank you for the music that you hear right here on the HBS.
Of course, find us on social at MikeOssie11, at Gerbo3, at Howitzer Buzzsaw. And again, if you can't find us, because we are everywhere you get your podcast, then you just are not trying hard enough. As we continue to be here in 2024, as the news gets more asinine, there's more reason for the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show to be here. We're the cockroach of the podcast game, whereas Doc Cruz is the cockroach of being an NBA head coach. I'll say that.
Cockroach of being put that in the title. My goodness. This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show, where we conquer job vacancies, carousels, and sports radio.
One day at a time. Industry.